Testing, 1, 2, 3.
Check 1, check 2. Yeah, I'll have to check your station also. Okay, thumbs up there. Switching over to French.
Check 1, check 2. Check 1, check 2.
Perfect.
Good.
Okay, if we could ask members of council to take their seats, on va commencer la réunion.
We are starting our meeting.
Finance and Economic Development Committee and the Governance Renewal Subcommittee for Thursday, the 25th of April, le 25 avril. To remind members, this item is being televised
On April 25th.
and 23. Declaration of interest. City Manager's Office, City Clerk and Solicitor's Department, Code of Conduct for Members of Council and Gift Registry, Code de conduite pour les membres du Conseil registré de cadeaux.
Code of Conduct for the Gifts Registry.
And if any member of the public would like to speak to this item, if they could fill out a form at the back and bring it to our clerk, we'd appreciate that. And item number 2, Council Expense Policy and Community Fundraising and Special Events Policy. So I believe we will begin with a presentation by, we have the Integrity Commissioner, the Clerk, and the Deputy Clerk, and our City Manager. And I'd like to thank those individuals. They put a lot of work into this, and I appreciate their long hours in getting this package together. It's a very thorough package, and turn the floor over to you, Mr. Clerk.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, members of the Joint Committee. I have the honor of introducing each of the reports for the Joint Committee's consideration this afternoon. And by way of overview, I just want to take a few moments to remind members of where we've been over the last couple of years. Beginning in December of 2010, members of Council unanimously endorsed the development of an accountability framework that would include the 4 or 5 of the following key measures: the development of a code of conduct for elected officials, the appointment of an integrity commissioner or advisor, the establishment of a lobbyist registry, the establishment of a public registry of gifts received by elected officials, and regular and mandatory publication of elected officials' office expenses. Furthermore, Mr. Mayor, that report observed that the Mayor has indicated that he will be leading the establishment of an accountability framework for elected officials and working with an integrity commissioner and staff to develop a code of conduct, as it's an important part of the framework. In January of 2011, all members of Council began to proactively disclose their office expenses on a monthly basis online. In July of 2011, Council adopted its term of Council priorities, which included the accountability framework as one of the key strategic initiatives for the priority entitled Governance, Planning and Decision Making. Furthermore, in November of 2011, the Lobbyist Registry report was considered by the Governance Renewal Subcommittee, and at that meeting the following directions were given to staff. Number 1, that staff review other offices of integrity commissioners and develop a proposal to create a City of Ottawa Integrity Commissioner that would endorse the Council Code of Conduct and report back to the committee on a suggested model with a Code of Conduct report. That staff review best practices and policies involving gift registries for the elected officials and report back to committee with a proposed gift registry. And that staff review other municipal codes of conduct for elected officials and develop a code of conduct for review by the public, committee and council. Now, I should say, Mr. Mayor, all those directions were originally directed towards the end of Q1 of 2012, but other things intervened, not the least of which was in July of 2012, Council approved the Lobbyist Registry and established the position of Integrity Commissioner with the following 2 main roles. Number 1, to provide input into the recommended Code of Conduct and related policies and protocols, and 2, to prepare, implement both an education component and an advisory element with regards to his or her position. As members will recall, Mr. Robert Marlowe was named the City's first Integrity Commissioner on September 1st, 2012. With respect to the first report concerning the draft Code of Conduct for members of Council and a gift registry, the Integrity Commissioner will provide the Joint Committee with his presentation. Mr. Mayor, I would recommend that immediately thereafter the Deputy Clerk would take the members through the proposed Council expense policy, after which Mr. Marlowe will finish up with a discussion of the draft Community Fundraising and Special Events policy. And I can add, Mr. Mayor, that this latter policy arose directly from Mr. Marlowe's experiences surrounding the City's Lobbyist Registry and his discussions with other integrity officials around the province. Finally, much of what staff have included in these reports, as directed by both of these committees and Council, are drawn from existing past practices here at the City, as well as lessons learned in a variety of other municipalities or governments across the country. That said, I would like to note that earlier this week, a member of council was quoted in the media as saying, "My bosses aren't city staff, it's the residents of my ward that are." Mr. Mayor, city staff wholly and wholeheartedly endorse this conclusion, and this sentiment is not only grounded in the Municipal Act, which is the framework for most of our work, but is also found in various places in the documents for the Joint Committee's discussion here today. Mr. Mayor, with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Marlowe to take you through the Code of Conduct and the Gift Registry presentation.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll try and be as brief as I can be, and I will spare you reading to you the Code of Conduct. I will make some remarks, and it will be challenging for the staff to keep up with me.
Get the microphone turned up a little or closer to Mr. Marlowe. Thank you.
Thank you. As the clerk and city solicitor has just outlined, my first priority when I arrived was to assist in the smooth development of the implementation of the lobby registry, and on that front I'd like to report that I think things are going extremely well. The second was to participate with the staff and add to the development of a code of conduct and the related policies that the clerk has just outlined. The process I followed, you will remember, is that I did 2 full rounds of consultations with members of council, seeking not only just your input and your insight, but also to get my own insight on the political culture at the City of Ottawa. There were several follow-up meetings with other councillors as needed, and I also did consultations with other integrity commissioners in the province. I did review the 2 major judicial inquiries in Ontario, the Bellamy and Cunningham inquiries, and also began a review of the very substantive research that city staff had done. There are 2 types of codes of conduct in Ontario. There's the values-based and there's the rules-based. The one before you, the draft that is before you, is somewhat of a hybrid, but I have to say I think it is more values-based than rules-based. I wanted in my approach in formulating these recommendations to you to guard against changing the fundamental nature of the informal ethical culture that exists here at City of Ottawa. Ottawa is absent of any ethical scandal at the time. It's important to remember that. I know someone in the media commented earlier last week that they found that amusing that I stated that, in my view, there is absence of scandal at this time, and it is the perfect time for you to consider implementation of such a code. Hence, the objective of the written text is to confirm practices that are already in place and to further guide councillors without adding a litany of prohibitions focused on bad behavior. The proposed code is largely value-based, as I said, and only in small part does it set specific rules, principally for the gift registry. Je ne vais pas vous lire le code comme je vous
will not read the code, as I said earlier. However, I will make a summary of an overview. So the main value of this code of conduct is respect. The respect of the law, respect of other people, meaning respect of citizens, colleagues, staff members, and intervenants. Respect of procedures, respect of the debate, the respect of public resources and public funding, the respect for what exists and what must remain confidential, respect for transparency, transparency with respect to expenditures, with respect to lobbying, respect for the transparency with respect to the legitimate influence, respect for the balance and the democratic experience and the electoral experience.
This draft code is very comprehensive, and I think it will stand the test of time and be a reference point for other municipalities in the province. I have not been able to find as comprehensive an analysis of the ethical conduct and expected behavior of elected public officials at the municipal level in the province of Ontario. Every section is supported either by existing jurisprudence, testimony in a judicial inquiry or before Parliament, an IC's report in another jurisdiction, or an incident in another municipality. Where possible, staff has endeavored to substantiate the proposals with quotes from recognized ethics experts. What is new to the City of Ottawa political culture is the lobby registry. In effect since September 1, it has added a great degree of transparency to business as it is done at the City of Ottawa. Ottawa is the only second city to adopt a lobby registry, and the code accounts for that. As Integrity Commissioner, my first role will be preventative. Under the compliance for the code, I am bound to advise, and I am bound by that advice. If a complaint is received, my first reflex will be to act as a mediator and a conciliator to resolve the issues informally, hopefully to the satisfaction of at least, or if not to the satisfaction, to the full understanding of all parties. However, if a formal complaint is insisted upon, it will be my duty to investigate pursuant to the powers given to me at the Municipal Act, and to make recommendations to Council in consequence of the facts and conclusions of the investigation. The complaints protocol is fairly simple. It is modeled after the meetings investigators process, not foreign to this corporation, and also will be without a fee. It's proposed that the Code of Conduct come into effect on July 1st, 2013. This is a forward-looking document. Quand le code sera adopté,
the code will be adopted. It will be your code. It is your code of conduct that will determine the evolution rather than the results from the Integrity Commissioner.
For years, they entrust their representatives with their expectations. One of those expectations is that respect will prevail. I believe the draft code acknowledges that expectation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great. Madam Deputy Clerk.
Moving on to the Council expense policy and the community fundraising and special events policy. The Council expense policy is, for members who've been around a while, an updating and largely a restatement of principles that were established in the office manual in 2002 and that have been updated in several reports subsequently. It has never been updated in a comprehensive way since really 2005, and we have adopted a number of practices that are simply not captured. The bulk of what you see in the proposed expense policy is a codification of what we already do. We're putting it in writing in part to fit those pieces that really fit under the full umbrella of the accountability framework, the code of conduct, and the lobbyist registry going forward. We're put in writing what we do so that the public is aware of how we how members of council manage the stewardship of their constituency services budget and what safeguards are in place. The expense policy, like the code, is going to be council's statements on their standards of how their constituency services budgets should be spent. We have found, as the Integrity Commissioner states and the clerk has stated, that the best time to put things in place is when there is no scandal that council is addressing. When we were reviewing expense policies in other areas that came out of scandals, there were some unusual practices, such as members having to fill out forms for business hospitality to state why they couldn't do their business within business hours. Toronto, for example, requires donors to community events to fill out a form to be co-signed by the member of council. So there are a lot of practices in place that we found to be more a political response rather than just a standard best practice in either accounting, documentation, or setting an ethical standard. The basic principles are that the public has a right to know how public funds are spent. Each council member represents a specific constituency and knows best their constituency's needs, but that basic accounting, audit, and tax principles, rules, and legislation should be understood and followed. And we wouldn't want members of the public to think that we're not following these things. Members of council will be aware that we're quite strict in receipts and documentations. This just puts in place what's already happening. So I just want to go over some very high-level things of what is changing a bit. And these changes are being based on largely on audits that have occurred in other jurisdictions that are establishing some best practices that, while we may be following to some degree, we're not following entirely, and then to address some issues that have been raised. So the first is the notion that members cannot purchase goods and services from a family member. This has been an issue in other municipalities where, for instance, a mayor or a councillor purchased business cards from his own family's printing firm at 4 times the cost of the standing offer. The notion as well of members' staff. You know, there was an issue with an audit where a mayor's staff person was in fact purchasing goods from a family member. The mayor had no idea. There were no rules in place to prohibit it. So this is, again, a proactive recommendation. The notion of members being able to donate funds that personally benefit individuals and businesses, this has been a permitted practice to some degree to this point. We were unable to find a municipality that allows this anywhere. So we're recommending that practice be closed. The notion of donations to charities, the best practice, and this was confirmed in audits, is that donations to charities that come from taxpayer constituency services budgets should be made from the City of Ottawa. The charitable receipts should be issued to the City of Ottawa. And so what we'll do is manage that through either the corporate purchasing card or a payment without reference card so that the charitable receipts come back to us. The notion of members' budgets not being used for communications and advertising outside their wards, this is something of a proactive recommendation. Members who were here following the previous ward boundary review will be aware that there were issues of people mailing into future wards that they may be representing. We're trying to do a proactive, we're making a recommendation that council make a determination about this before it becomes an issue in following 2015. The appropriate documentation, original receipts, again, this codifies what is required and is a best practice. And in keeping with the routine and proactive disclosure that council has already embarked on, both by approving that protocol expenses be proactively disclosed, also their own expenses, it increases some disclosure, particularly in areas of all city-funded travel, not just that out of your office budget. Only a few ineligible expenses, alcohol, personal expenses, and this is things like clothing, flights for spouses, that kind of thing. Again, not so much an issue here. Golf clubs, I could say. It's been an issue in other municipalities. Gifts from member staff or other employees of the city. This is a standard recommendation in most other municipalities. The limits, the issues of contributions being limited, and these are donations, to 3.5% of the members' annual budgets. So for council, this is about, it's about $8,450. For the mayor, it's about $27,000. This is something that we struggled with somewhat in the sense of the wisdom of Solomon. Ethics experts do not agree on whether donations are appropriate out of members' constituency budgets. And we do talk about this in the report. But I just want to to say here to answer the questions that we've been hearing from members of council over the intervening week since this has been public. This is simply the donations line. It's not, the notion is not to recommend a cap. It does not cover communications and marketing. It does not cover community events. It does not cover hospitality. It is strictly the donations line in your office expenditures. The other notion is donations to city-funded services and programs from a member budget would be done by council. And I think Councillor Clark's funding for the traffic installation in his ward, he did by way of a council report. So the notion is City Council adopts a budget. City Council adopts a budget because it says this is where we see our priorities going. The best way to ensure accountability is that if you're changing the City Council's budget, you should have the approving authorities okay with that. So that's the recommendation. Those are the basic changes that are different from what we're already doing now.
Mr. Mayor, the final component is the community fundraising and special events policy. There are three kinds of events that councillors are involved in. There's the community-focused, more ward-focused event, and for that we propose no change. Already through the expense policy, you have well-established practices and about how to fund part of these events in your own wards, and how the community comes together, and the local grocery store might provide the hot dogs and you might provide security. That is unchanged. The second is where councillors promote a cause or a charity, sometimes overspilling the interests of a particular ward. It could be citywide, and for here I use the example of Councillor Chiarelli's New Year's activity in relationship with IKEA as a sponsor. You already have a practice, well-established practice. Several councillors have an account with the deputy clerk. Funds are raised. They are expended through the clerk's office as required, and there is a good arm's length relationship from the councillor and the funds that are actually raised. The only thing we're adding to that dimension of in the policy is transparency, that at the end of the event or at the end of the year, whatever is appropriate, there would be disclosure of receipts and disbursements. The third one is the special events policy, particularly for fundraising at large. And there's a long tradition here, as in many other communities, that councillors lend their public persona to a particular cause, a charity, all of them completely worthwhile as concepts. However, because of the lobby registry now, we have to be mindful about where those funds are being raised, how they're being raised, and who is raising them. The essence of this policy finds its genesis, if I can put it that way, in a Integrity Commissioner's report, former Justice Cameron, at the City of Brampton, which was related to the Mayor's annual gala. And there are three basic principles. First, you should partner with a third party organization and ensure that for your own interest and for the corporation's interest, that they have the necessary safeguards to minimize the risk to the public trust. Second, in that relationship, you should ensure that all of the funds that are raised are channeled directly to that organization. Again, the principle here is to keep the elected public official at arm's length from any of the funds. Third, there's nothing that stops you or prohibits you in this policy or even encourages you not to advocate fundraising. You have to be mindful, however, that because of the lobby registry, lobbyists in their own code of conduct should not be making contributions directly to you, nor should their clients with active registrations. So therefore, it is urged you can only urge, because we don't control these third-party organizations on the outside, that they be the ones who, on your behalf or in your name, in your public role, raise the funds directly for anyone that's in the registry as having an active file with the city. And finally, the principle there is transparency, just like for the rest of the policy, that you should urge this third-party partner to be transparent, and at the end of the event, and most of them do actually, most of the credible charitable organizations or festivals or fundraising activities do publish on their website audited statements with disclosure of revenues and disbursements. By the same token, you should, even if you're the honorary chair or a member of the board, be cautious about participating in decisions on disbursements. That is the only new element that is brought before you as a new policy, but I think it's consistent with the elements of the code and the elements you've already put in place for the lobby registry. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great. Thank you all three very much. We have one member of the public who would like to speak. If anyone else would like to speak on this item, please fill out a form. Professor Robert Shepard, Carleton University School of Public Policy. So if he could come to, maybe Rick, you can point out the appropriate delegation stand, and welcome Professor Shepard. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and members of Council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about an important subject in contemporary governance. I'd like to begin by commending City Council for considering the adoption of the reports being considered here today. These are indeed important steps forward for building a collective understanding of Council's responsibilities in these areas, both for yourselves and citizens more broadly. My purpose is to offer a few brief comments on the trends in government ethics and the strengths and limitations on the use of codes of conduct, in particular from a national and international perspective. To begin, there is a growing skepticism among citizens about the integrity of their political officials. They do not believe politicians work toward any conception of the public good, represent and serve their interests, nor do they listen to citizens' concerns. There is indeed a litany of sins that can be elucidated, from procurement scandals to hidden agendas to misrepresenting election expenses to outright corruption. The use of codes of conduct has been pervasive in Western democracies to calibrate public understanding of government ethical responsibilities, and in a sense has been used to reestablish and revitalize an old idea of social contract between citizens and their public representatives. In short, these codes are used as a vehicle for reaffirming legitimacy, credibility, and trust in government. To the extent that codes of conduct can reasonably set out positive ethics rules for elected and bureaucratic officials is critical for ensuring that citizens understand fully what their elected representatives both can do and cannot do as part of their regular duties. That said, there are some notable observations for considering codes of conduct that I'd like to highlight according to the academic literature. The first challenge is that codes of conduct have been embraced by elected officials mainly to demonstrate they run good, clean government. Their hope is that these codes will improve public trust in government. One of the main challenges, however, is that it is difficult to assess whether in fact the ethics rules and machinery can detect and or even deter bad behavior or decisions. The other challenge, of course, is whether elected officials actually possess the real will and desire for these codes to make such assessments. Certainly the Canadian experience at all levels of government has been that the machinery surrounding these codes has been limited, leaving citizens to wonder whether their elected officials are actually serious about ethics. When these functions become too effective, if that's possible, elected officials, the masters of these functions, will often respond by starving them out, sidelining their activities, or, as in the case of the federal PBO, discredit them publicly. Second, there may be an inclination to set a slippery slope of increasingly more precise set of rules. Once put into effect, there is the desire, much as in the case of the U.S. federal conflict of interest and lobbying experience, to plug gaps and loopholes like the Dutch boy and the leaking dike. On the other hand, one could take the experience of New Zealand, which uses such codes as their social contract outlining overall governmental obligations to citizens. Their code sets out reasonable and reachable objectives and is open to feedback. Japan has recently set out a performance policy and ethics code that establishes that elected officials must set out an electoral plan on their priorities and then construct an implementation and ethics strategy for carrying these out. In effect, their approach is to build an implicit contract with their constituents with clear performance targets. Third, enforcement of the code should be clearly spelled out. As noted in the report, compliance under the City of Ottawa Code mirrors that of other municipalities, including that of Toronto. Penalties aside, however, it is commendable that the principal responsibilities of the Integrity Commissioner are to educate and provide advice and to act as a positive resource. Fourth, there is a movement in several jurisdictions to widen the boundaries of what constitutes private interest and conflict of interest. Most codes, including the Federal Code of Conduct, define interest exclusively in financial terms. Interests are financial assets and liabilities. This has proven limiting in cases where partisan or political interests are at play. Council's consideration of how to treat donations, for example, from office budgets, appears to me to fall into a broader category of private interest. Finally, I would like to highlight that while the appointment of independent agents or officers is pervasive, the role of these persons should be carefully considered. The implicit assumption behind their appointment is that they will provide objective, independent, and expert advice. If this is the case for the City of Ottawa's code, as it appears to be, then what is clear from the literature is that the most effective offices are those where there is a respectful working relationship built on openness and trust. The converse is the relationship being viewed openly in the media in Toronto. Although much attention has been drawn in the last 20 years about the conduct of public servants, little attention has been placed on the conduct of elected officials. As a place to begin this part of the equation, I believe that overall this document provides a reasoned starting point. One can quibble over certain provisions, but the commitment to a code is to be commended. I think I will end my comments there, but I'm willing to take questions.
Great. Thank you very much. Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Professor, this 8-page report, which I got by email this morning, not including the references, you mentioned the appointment of independent agents per phase of becoming commonplace. The role should be considered. Very little research available. But what about the separation of function? In other words, is having the individual ethics commissioner under the aegis of city staff provide adequate separation?
The experience in most jurisdictions is that there is a clear separation of function, usually between the elected officials and staff. That is commonplace. The federal experience, as you may know, is a little different. Agents of Parliament report directly through Parliament, and that proves to be a little problematic at times, especially when they're the ones that control the money.
And you also point out that the difference between providing information and lobbying should be defined, and that both parties should be keeping a lobbyist registry, if you will. I think that puts a different emphasis on it from a councillor's point of view, and wonder whether how this adds to the thing. Just pick up misses or hits or misses, or what's the purpose of having a duplicate record in a councillor's office?
The lobbyist code of conduct is something that I'm a little familiar with, having assisted in writing it, the federal one, and my wife being the lobbying commissioner. I'm a little familiar with this area. And it depends on what value you place in priority. If the idea is openness and transparency, then it seems clear that as a public official, the onus ought to be primarily on them as to who one is speaking to with respect to decisions and major issues of public policy. The federal code does not do that. It requires the onus is entirely on the lobbyist to do that under a registration, and we simply do not know what the universe of decisions is or lobbying activities is on their behalf. If there was a little bit more onus on the public official, one would get, in my view, a little bit better clarity on what that universe of decisions are.
Okay, it just seems to me to be excessive. Then you come into the donation to charities. Really, it's whether the donation to charity is done in your own self-interest or for some other reason. And the implication that it's done for self-interest is something I find probably drawing conclusions that may not be adequate. So I guess you want to expand that a little bit?
Yeah, the issue of donations. I found it very interesting that the original introductory comments found that there was some divide among ethics so-called experts in deciding on which side of the line to come in on. I found that a little surprising, to be very frank. There does appear to be common acceptance, at least in the literature, that one should always err on the side of avoiding any appearance of private interest, as opposed to whether you wish a bureaucracy to be a little bit more responsive or you wish your public officials to be more responsive and attuned to public activities. There's nothing wrong in the former, except that one could lead to an impression on the part of the public that you're making these donations in order to be reelected and to leave an impression on the part of voters. I mean, this is the trouble we got into a little bit with the federal Gomery inquiry. We left it up to officials to make decisions and let them come to the merit criteria around these donations. That, to me, should be a lesson that could be learned by most of us.
Okay.
Thanks, Councillor Clark. Councillor McRae, please.
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I want to thank you very much, Professor Shepherd, for your letter, and certainly appreciate that you took the time to actually send so much detail, and then respecting our own protocol, you cut it down to just the high level and stuck within your 5 minutes, and yet took the time to send this. So I like this a lot. I want to ask you a quick question on page 8 of your letter, and it's with regards to the lobbying registry. And I know that Councillor Clark just picked up on that a little bit, but what is your comment to us or your advice to us with regards to councillors not just keeping a list of who's lobbying us, but publicly disclosing that? Because during the lobbyist registry, I was prepared to vote for a dual reporting system, and I know that we've discussed that with our clerk's office, and I know that one of our colleagues who's actually works for a law firm right now was there that day and spoke about it. What are your comments on the not even a requirement, but a willingness for municipal councils to actually keep their list, but also make sure it goes on ottawa.ca?
Well, as you probably know, that those are two separate matters. One, keeping some record of who council is speaking with as individuals, and then the next point, whether that list should become transparent and open to the public. With respect to the first point, I can tell you that the usual experience where lobbyist registries are concerned is that either the lobbyist is required to register and register all their communications, and the people that they are lobbying are asked to keep a record as well in order to check against that.
Right.
That's the federal experience, not just in Canada, but in other jurisdictions, the U.S., the UK, Australia. The other option, of course, is the one that you've just recommended, that rather than duplicating, you could duplicate, as you're suggesting, or you could simply keep a record as individual councillors that the lobbyist registrar would be able to go and verify against. The transparency question aside is really one of preference, whether you wish to do that or not. And the literature is mixed on the second point.
Sure, but through the mayor, wouldn't it be easier for the public then to access in a more transparent way who's been lobbying us if we did post that? Would that not be an accurate statement?
Well, it's hard to argue with more transparency is better.
Sure, okay.
But I think the only difference really for those of us that work in this area is the difference between transparency and openness. And I think that's a matter of degree, and I think that's at the root of your question. Transparency is how much, leaves it up to you to decide how much information you wish to put out there. Openness is all about putting all information available out there for the public in order for the public to react to. I think this is a matter of degree.
Sure.
And the federal system errs on the side of less, not more, I can tell you that.
Okay.
And most provinces are on the less, not more side.
Okay, well, through the mayor, thank you again, and I appreciate that you added a reference list. Very much like the unbelievably excellent work of the trio over there, led by our deputy clerk, where they did references. I appreciate that because it then gives us an opportunity, if we want to go and find the actual paper to read more, it's there. And again, I would encourage anyone that appears before council committee to take the time to do something as well as you've done it and within the time frame you did it in. It's simply superb. So, Mr. Mayor, thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Aguilar, please.
Just a quick question, and I intend to ask staff this question down the road as well. But since we have you in the room and you've taken the time to come here and prepare this response for us, and you have the background in the area, one of the terms that is in the report and was in the presentation was donations, and I'd just like to hear from you whether you see a distinction between a charitable donation and something that we do as councillors on a regular basis, and that is either a sponsorship or a community partnership with a community association around whether it be a barbecue or a park cleanup or a winter carnival, that sort of thing. Do you see a distinction or a difference between that and sponsoring or writing a check for a charitable event? Do you see a difference there?
Well, I can say that relying on the literature for a moment, there is generally a much gray area between what constitutes a donation and what constitutes a sponsorship. I mean, again, the federal experience around this, we had the whole program around Gomery was precisely advertising and sponsoring program, right? And the sponsoring part of this, the merit criteria used to establish what constitutes a sponsorship was left really up to the officials on their own without any amount of clarity. And that got the Liberal government under, put it under a great deal of scrutiny, as you know, a whole commission of inquiry. I think the challenge here is what constitutes a private interest. And it is on that point that there seems to be erring on the side of caution with respect to that point, that if one is leaving it up to an individual elected official to make those kinds of judgments, one has to wonder as a citizen whether one is doing this for the right reasons or not. I think that's the key point. And that's the ethical argument. It's not really about whether there's a distinction as much as is there a private interest that is being secured here. The second point is what are the merit criteria.
Can I stop you there just for a second? Okay. Just a quick follow-up on that.
Sure.
So in the scenario that I described, for example, helping a community association have a spring barbecue or a fall corn roast, and again, I stress the word community association. Would you, I want you to put on your expert hat here for a second, and in your opinion, is that a private interest if you're helping to sponsor an event for the whole community?
And I will have to be somewhat cautious again in the response, in that this is a definition that has to be left up to council. But generally, if the idea is that there is some kind of a rational, merit-based process that says this is something that as council or as individual councillors we want to do, and it has some rationale and fact, then this probably seems fine, as long as it's open and transparent. The difficulty becomes whether how does one decide whether this is meritorious and another event is not meritorious? I think that's the part that citizens would be concerned about ethically.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Councillor Thompson?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. I don't have any questions, but I did provide to you and to Ms. Whalen.
All right, we're on questions to the delegations right now. So you don't have questions to the delegations?
No.
Okay.
And I have a notice
Does anyone
of
else
referral.
have any questions to the delegations? No? Okay, thank you very much, Professor. Appreciate you taking the time. Okay, debate. Councillor Thompson.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I have a notice of referral that I provided to you before the beginning of the meeting, a copy to Ms. Whalen, that my understanding is should be dealt with at this time.
Do you want to read it?
Yes, I will. And I think there should be a copy appear up on the screen. The motion is I'm moving that the item number 1, Code of Conduct for Members of Council and Gift Registry, and item 2, Council Expense Policy and Community Fundraising and Special Events Policy, be referred to the City Council meeting of May 8th, 2013, to allow all members of Council the opportunity to debate, discuss, introduce motions, and vote on these policies. And if you wish, I would speak to that motion at this time.
Well, just to clarify, this item is before us because Council referred it to this joint committee. We all came here under the understanding that we're going to debate it, and then the whole thing will be referred back to the full Council. So I'm not sure the point of the motion to refer it, and you don't want us to debate anything right now?
Mr. Mayor, I would if you would provide me the opportunity, I would explain the reasons for this, and I think it is in order that this motion of referral be dealt with at this time.
Well, if you want to speak to it, just caution you, though, that if you're going to move this, then there'll be no questions of staff and no debate on the item, and we'll have to refer the whole thing to the committee, which I fundamentally disagree with. That's the purpose of having committees. So go ahead.
I'm well aware of that. The reason that I put forward this motion of referral, there are a number of things. First of all, Mr. Mayor, I want to make it quite clear that this is not a challenge to your leadership or the goals that you aspire on behalf of Council and the City on this issue. But this report that we have in front of us was provided to us about a week ago. And it's a massive policy with a huge magnitude and long-term implications for present members of Council and future members of this City Council. There are also a number of, and I believe there are 3 members of the Joint Committee who are not here today for a variety of reasons. And the other thing, Mr. Mayor, as I indicated, this impacts every member of Council present and in the future. And at committee meetings, members, and there are members of Council who are here or not on the Joint Committee, but and they can ask questions, but they're not allowed to move motions. They have to get someone else to, and that is a procedure that we have used in the past. But it's in my opinion, and I've spoken to other members of the Joint Committee, that we would be best served by moving this item forward to Council, where everyone on Council will have an opportunity to ask questions to staff. They will have an opportunity to move motions on their own without having to seek someone else's input, and I just feel that that is the proper way to go. And Mr. Mayor, I want to make it quite clear that myself and other members of the committee are not using this as an excuse because we're not prepared, because I know other members of committee are quite prepared. I am. I have probably 6 pages of questions, and I just want to show that this document has been thoroughly read and highlighted, so I have a number of points that I want to bring. I've even brought a prop to use to outline some of my concerns and questions. But I just feel it's the best interests of City Council now and in the future to have this referred to City Council for an exhaustive and full-fledged debate at City Council.
Others on referral? Councillor Clark.
Well, there are 18 of us here today. I don't know how much of an increase in the airing out of this topic will be by referring it. Personally, I'd like to air some of the issues out first, and then you can refer it. But the point is that, you know, we came here today expecting to talk about this, not to have it to shorten the meeting as such. And I guess from my point of view, I'll just vote against referral for that reason.
Others on referral? I'm going to vote against referral. This is the whole reason why we set this special joint committee meeting up. Members of council, we see there's a lot of interest in this topic. 18 members out of 24 are here. I believe 2 others are going to try to come a little later, so we have the majority of council here. This is the role of committees. Then what's the point of having a committee structure if every time a difficult issue comes forward we say, well, let's not touch it now, we'll just refer it? I think many members came prepared to ask questions. We have the Integrity Commissioner here. The public are here. They're not entitled to speak at a council meeting, so that's why we have a committee structure. So I would urge that members vote against referral, and let's get down to the business that we're elected to do. So yeas and nays, please, on referral.
I know that ASN has been called, but on the procedures, we are not on any committee. So, do we have a role here? Do you ask us or not? That's the question.
You're entitled to speak, as you know, Councillor, at any committee.
Mr. Mayor, I'm talking about the vote. Please.
No, if you're not a member of the committee, you don't vote. That's correct. Okay, so yeas and nays from members of the joint committee. Yeah, go ahead.
Councillor Shirelli?
Yes.
Councillor Deans? Councillor Eglai?
No.
Councillor Hubley? No.
Let's use the paper.
Sorry. Councillor Eglai was no. Councillor Hubley?
No.
Councillor Hobbs? Councillor Hume? Councillor McCrae?
No.
Councillor Moffat?
Yes.
Councillor Monette?
Yes. Councillor Monette.
Councillor Taylor?
Yes.
Councillor Thompson?
Yes.
Councillor Clark? Mayor Watson?
No.
It's 5 yeas, 5 nays.
Okay, the motion's defeated. So questions and debate on the 2 items that are before us. Anyone have any questions? Councillor Harder. Councillor Harder.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I didn't think I'd get on first, but I do have to go and attend the sponsorship for the official plan group meetings at 2. Yeah, I'm the sponsor to the OPL for the whole thing for the whole year. So that was planned ahead of this meeting being called. I have my question today is because I think that, again, as somebody said, I think that this is a very well done report. I know that our new Integrity Commissioner spent a lot of time with us. I know I spent time with him and obviously had my concerns with regard to how it would impact on the way that I've always done business and you know, some of the work that I've done. But I do have a question, and I'm hoping I'm reading it right in the way that you have addressed it in the presentation. and that is the last page where it says, if more than $25,000 in funds raised, net organization be encouraged to encourage public. So it's just encouraged, because what I would say is, if we're going to go beyond that, then any organization that is raising money, it's hard enough to do that. If we want them to do an audit, and they're not a large organization, then I suggest if it's a Canada Day, for example, at Petrie, or Canada Day in Barrhaven or Canada or something like that, I think we should pay for it. If it's us that are doing the asking, that would be my recommendation, that we would be doing that. Also, from my perspective, just to say it, because I'm leaving, unfortunately, I'm not at ease with the contributions being limited to the 3.5%. I think that should be entirely under the individual representatives' control. I think most of us didn't spend more than that, but I do think that that should be up to the review of the electorate, and not to anyone else. We're capable of managing our own budget and serving our people, and so I just throw that's my opinion. But as far as my comment on the audit, am I reading that correct? That you are leaving it up to, suggesting it but not enforcing it?
Mr. Mayor, the member is absolutely correct. It was just a suggestion.
And again, I'm not against having it done as long as we're paying for it. So what would you suggest or anticipate a process for that would be, if we decided that we wanted to go that way with all fundraising over a certain amount?
Mr. Mayor, that part of the policy, which is when you partner with a third-party charitable organization or otherwise, is really intended as guidelines. The City Council does not regulate how charities operate. Therefore, these are guidelines for you in partnering with these third parties as to what you might urge them to do to mitigate your personal risk as an elected official or the city's risk. So in terms of the $25,000 threshold, I came to that as a recommendation after discussion with the Auditor General. I mean, some fundraising exercises fail. It would be ridiculous to encourage them.
Can you just speak louder, please?
Yes.
Well, can we turn the volume up, please? And Mr. Marlowe, if you could speak closer to the microphone.
I will try. And some fundraising exercises fail. They're not very successful, so there's hardly any point in trying to get them to spend more money on some kind of a audited statement. But most of the organizations that you're involved with have some form of website reporting and certainly some accounting.
I'll just give you some examples of the three that I just mentioned: Petrie Island, Canada Day; Canada Day; Barrhaven, Canada Day. The fact is that they have to raise, probably the smallest one is the Barrhaven one that has about 25,000 people, and they have to raise $70,000 a year. Now, I can tell you that for 16 years I ran it. Fortunately, I'm also not in that position as of 3 years ago where I don't also have to run it. Somebody else has stepped up to the plate, but they're not a formal organization. They're a group of community people, and I'm sure the same is the case in Orleans at Petrie. So I don't want to support something that is going to penalize or take money away from the huge amount of money that they have to raise to do something that is of such significance to these communities that they serve. That's all that I want to know the answer to, because they're not a formal group. They don't provide charitable donation receipts or anything.
That part of the policy would not apply to a community organization such as you describe, where there particularly has been a track pattern as well of this kind of community coming together and doing Canada Day, for instance.
Good.
It only applies if you partner with a more official organization like an NGO, an NPO, or a charitable organization which is registered with CRA. In those kinds of instances, that would apply.
So, Mr. Mayor, I would just say then that those are the kind of assurances that I'm looking for in this report. I just need to know that the hardworking people that we have in the city that are you know, because we are running a tight budget, right? And we know that the pressures we have within the city, that when they have to step up to the plate and do things to augment the services that we're providing, for example, that they're not going to have to go through yet another process. So I have comfort in what the comments were. Thank you very much.
And I think, you know, to give credit to Mr. Marlowe and the clerk and the deputy clerk, they've also met with members of council to address some of their specific concerns, and I think my understanding is that the vast majority of those have been addressed to, in this case, your satisfaction, so I appreciate that. Councillor Eglai, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thanks to the team, because they certainly have made themselves available to answer questions, and there's been lots of them. So I just wanted to talk about a few things that we have talked about before and make sure I understand them, make sure we have them on the record. One of the issues about donations and sponsorships, a part of the report refers to not being able to donate or sponsor for a single individual. And I want some clarification on that. Recently in my ward, the whole community got together and supported a little girl who couldn't see, needed special glasses that cost $15,000, for which there wasn't any funding. The Kiwanis, community businesses, community members, volunteers all got together. It wasn't a registered charity or anything else, but it was a great community building event. And if this goes through the way it's worded, do we lose that? Because that would be a real shame. It brought the whole community together on a very special project.
Mayor, this kind of event would actually not be affected. You would require to request of us an exemption, which would be granted. This whole policy, when we were working together on it with the Integrity Commissioner's advice, what happens in a member's office is so nuanced. We could not draft a policy to this level of granularity. But that is exactly the role of a councillor. The Integrity Commissioner agrees, and is not what is meant by an individual, because this is really a community coming together. So where a family has had everything lost in a fire, where any of those sorts of things, where the elected official is partnering with the community to manage that fundraising, all you need to do is seek an exemption, but it would be granted.
If all we have to do is apply for an exemption, and as you put it, it will be granted, then why do we have to apply for an exemption? I'm not trying to be difficult, but
it becomes a question of where does the money go. If the Lions is, for example, as an example, if the Lions are running the bank account, not an exemption. But if it becomes a question of it's going to actual people, it's to allow for transparency.
Okay, thank you for that. Something that a number of us do, including the mayor and councillors, is we're often asked to act as honorary chairs for charity. I've done the Gutsy Walk. Councillor Hubley just is doing the Dragon Boat this year. And where does that fall? Are we then fall in the category in the report of directly raising funds, or are we still allowed to participate in that activity? Because, again, I see it as part of community building.
Mr. Mayor, in that kind of context, there is really no proposed change save one, and that is that councillors have to have an eye to the lobby registry. In other words, if you're the honorary chair for Dragon Boat, you can sign call letters for fundraising to the community at large, so long as that money is payable directly to the organization you're partnering with. However, you should not be the signatory that would be directed to anyone with active registration files. Nothing prevents the Dragon Boat, as an example, from doing their own call letter as broadly as they like, including the registry for that matter. We do not regulate these third-party organizations outside of the reach of the municipal council. Some will say that is just driving the same fundraising under the table or to the side. The principle here is to keep the public elected official at arm's length from the funds and the appearance of an exchange of influence when and if those funds are forthcoming. So in terms of that relationship, you can have your picture on the letterhead, you can be the signatory to a general call letter, so long as it's not directed to lobbyists who have their own code, which they should not make contributions in that kind, and any of their clients with active registrations.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to ask you essentially the same question I asked the delegation, and that is, do you think it makes sense to have a distinction between a purely charitable donation out of an office budget versus a community partnership, such as, for example, in my ward, they started something a number of years ago called Hockey Day in Ward 9. They needed some seed money to do that. I've seen it grow every year. More and more teams, more and more community associations get involved. But it's not a charity. It's purely driven by my community associations. And again, it's a great community building event. So I see a distinction there myself in terms of, but I don't see that necessarily in the report. So can you comment on that?
Mr. Mayor, with pleasure. I did struggle with that language, with that vocabulary, and the references that Professor Shepard made to the Gomery Commission and donations and sponsorships, a famous sponsorship scandal. I tried to avoid the use of the word sponsorship where possible, and the word donation where it wasn't clearly to a charitable organization. If you look at page 55 under the restriction on expenses, I've used the word contributions. You may say it's semantics, but I think it's an important semantic. The kind of support that you just outlined, Councillor, Mr. Mayor, is really a contribution to a group, to a community, in support of their objectives. It's not a donation in the same sense that you would give to, say, the Cancer Society. In my view, you have made an evaluation of those objectives as a public official, and you've decided that it is in the public interest or your community interest to support that with funds that Council has made available to you. I don't see it quite as a donation.
Yet you still have them all under the cap. Is that not correct? You're still all those things are wrapped into one ball under the 3.5% cap.
Yes.
And I can tell you from hearing from my community associations, it's not the idea of the cap that's a concern, or a cap. The concern is whether it's a large enough cap to accommodate events like that, circumstances like that. Your community has a 50-year anniversary, for example, and they want to do something a little bit bigger. So that's the point I'm trying to make here. Whether I understand where you got 3.5%, but I'm not sure that it addresses all the things that could happen. I'll leave that for now, but I have another question. An election year, and we talked about this, and you asked me to bring this up at committee. An election year, there is language around events you've held in the previous 2 years. It's a little bit confusing in that it sounds like you can't have that event in election year if you filed your election papers. I understand that's not the case. I think on page 45 of the report, the insertion of the word new would be helpful in pointing out that it's any new event within that period. And I think we discussed that, and I think you had indicated that that was acceptable. I don't know if I give that to you as direction or how, but.
We concur with that, Mr. Mayor, and we have actually prepared a motion should anyone wish to move it.
Well, I'm happy to move it if it requires a motion as opposed to a direction. But not now, because I have a few more questions. I want to talk a little bit about the piece that deals with complaints against councillors under the integrity portion of it or the ethics portion of it. It seems that the legislation indicates that in such a circumstance, a councillor would not have a right to reply either written or in person or by proxy. Is that accurate?
Sorry, could the councillor repeat that, please?
Sure, as long as my clock doesn't run while I'm doing it. The report seems to indicate from a legislative point of view that if a complaint is filed against a councillor that he or she does not have the right to reply either verbally, written, or by proxy. Is that accurate?
Mr. Mayor, as a result of the Rob Ford litigation that recently concluded with the higher courts, it is only where there is a pecuniary or financial interest involved.
But in those cases, we would not have any opportunity to speak to the matter.
That's correct. The court has actually been very clear on that point.
And Mr. Clerk, in your role within other clerks in the province, is that a contentious issue? Is that something that's under review?
We understand, Mr. Mayor, that the province has indicated on a number of occasions it is looking at the Municipal Conflict of Interest Act where the problem lies, and they have said they are undertaking a review of it.
And is there anything we can do today to help you with that position on behalf of this City Council?
Perhaps not today, Mr. Mayor, but certainly if the consultation becomes broader, I'm actually meeting with municipal law departments tomorrow, and a representative from the province will be there, and the lawyers will be asking those very questions. So I may have something back for council in due course.
Okay, I'm going to go off the list at this point. I do want to do some wrap up on this, but I only have 14 seconds left, and if nobody else brings the motion, I'll get back to that at that point as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Taylor, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of questions. I'm going to wander a little bit. With respect to the report, it's silent on what happens if an organization who is not a lobbyist and sponsors something, then at a future point becomes a lobbyist, and that event then is an entrenched kind of repetitive event. So I'm thinking of an organization or a business that, traditionally isn't a developer, that kind of lobbyist, but then, they repeatedly sponsor an event, and now it's time again this year for the event, but now they're a lobbyist. Now they're asking for something. How would you handle that?
Mr. Mayor, in that particular context, the policy for special events does provide for consultation with the deputy clerk, the clerk, and the IC commissioner. If there was a situation with, hypothetically, let's take the IKEA example that Councillor Chiarelli so well handles, there would be a track record there. It may be that IKEA comes for a signage exemption of some kind, and then with consultation with myself and the city staff, I think we could easily grant an exemption or in a transparent way show that this was discussed. So the idea here is not so much to do some gotcha entrapment because a business or a developer or an individual decides that they have to lobby the city for the good of their community. The idea is to bring transparency to the process.
Okay, thank you very much. Kind of moving on, in terms of you touched on, if you're an honorary chair of an event, as long as you're not involved in the actual mechanics of it, the soliciting of donations, that kind of thing, oftentimes events will ask you to provide your signature to put on their fundraising letters, which go out. So are you suggesting that in that scenario, and that's usually why they want you as an honorary chair, to help, open the door, I then would be responsible for kind of vetting the lists of to whom that was sent to ensure that it was not being sent to people who were on the lobbyist registry? Because oftentimes charities just say, look, we're sending it out to our prospective list, and they typically don't necessarily show you who that is.
The policy as drafted, Mr. Mayor, urges the councillor to pay attention to that and to advise the registry, the partner charity or organization to be careful not to send letters out under your signature to anyone who's in the registry. As I said, there are other occasions where it might happen by mistake, by happenstance. That can all be sorted out. But you can't make them do something. But I think you want to minimize your risk and the risk to the City Council by making these urgings and putting some emphasis on it.
Okay. Okay, so consultation, I guess, with your office is key in situations like that. I'm going to veer into the territory of the gifts now. Maybe I'm not a popular guy, but I don't receive many gifts.
What's with you?
What I do receive, though, is whole handfuls of things which I understand in the report would be, considered really not gifts. Things like T-shirts, hats, all that kind of stuff, mugs, those types of things. I typically keep those, and then I become a re-gifter. And when people ask me, we're putting together a basket for an auction at the local high school, could you give us a basket of stuff? I take a bunch of stuff that costs the taxpayer nothing, put it in the basket, send it. It's for a good cause, and they yield money off of it. So in this scenario, would I still be allowed to do that, or would I have to turn around to the school and say, can't send you gifts in kind, but I can send you a check for $50, provided it fulfilled all of the other criteria?
No change in current practice, Councillor. Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so that remains the same. On personal items, I certainly understand, I think we all do, why you're not allowed to buy personal items. But I'm going to go back to, we just came through the Christmas season. All of us appeared on floats wearing jackets that said City of Ottawa on one side and our councillor's name on the other side. And when I joined council, there was let's all get the same jacket so we have a uniform look so that when we're out there, the public understand who we are. Is that off the table, or is that still allowed?
That is allowed, as is the practice councillors have of giving their staff essentially uniforms to wear so that they can be easily identified at events. That's all part of communications and marketing, like the mugs and the fridge magnets, not covered by the cap and permitted.
Okay. So that's considered communications and marketing. Going back, Councillor Eagle, I touched on a point about, you can't make a donation for that benefits a specific individual. How does constituency work fit in? And I'll give you a very brief example. Obviously, it's a constituency case, so there's privacy issues, and I can't go too deep into it, but one constituent was facing a very complicated situation, and it was for a very limited amount of time. They needed transportation and travel covered. We found it effective just to simply buy them a small stack of bus tickets. We could have put them through the social services system, but the reality is by the time they came out the other side of it, the problem would have passed. How is that handled? I mean, it's a constituency services budget, so how do you navigate that?
That would be covered by the recommended prohibition. We could find no comparable situation where that is done.
Okay, so then that's off the table. Okay, and I think just going back to one general question, I suppose, about the whole events side and the invitation side. Again, I really don't have any issue with the number of tickets you can take and from who and whatnot. Is there a distinction, though, between your role as a councillor and your role as the chair of a standing committee? I mean, I receive lots of invitations to things, requests to go places as a result of being the chair of CPS that I wouldn't otherwise get as the councillor for Bay Ward. How's that handled?
Mr. Mayor, that would be exempt because we do recognize the chairs of standing committee have distinct roles here at the City of Ottawa.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Thompson, please.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. I want to. Could I ask the clerk to answer that question again about chairs of committees, just so for my. I was half listening, but I was getting excited about it because it's close to my turn to talk.
We have it under one of the exemptions, Mr. Mayor, as a part of the responsibilities of the office, and the City of Ottawa Council has been very clear about the importance and roles of committee chairs, so it would be exempt.
Okay, thank you. I thought that's what you had said. I just want to go back to page 3 of the report, and it talks about current practices, and it talks about the House of Commons, the Senate, and the City of Winnipeg. Were there other municipalities that were looked at in regard to case studies because, and I talked to an MPP who said this policy is much more strict than the provincial one that we're here to discuss.
Oh, Mr. Mayor, we looked at many policies in Ontario: Richmond Hill, Vaughan, Windsor, Hamilton, London, Toronto, Sudbury. If there was an expense policy out there for Ontario, I believe we looked at it.
I'm sure you did, but I just didn't hear it, unless it's somewhere else I missed it. It didn't say. Okay, thank you. And on that same page at the bottom, it says members of the stewards of city resources spend exclusively for the fulfillment of public duties. Could you clarify for my interpretation of what you consider public duties? Because I racked my brain on that and I wasn't quite sure. We're not on the same page?
I think our pages, I'm working electronically, they're
Okay.
working physically, we're all a little confused.
Okay.
But in terms of the clause, Mr. Mayor, it is, and what it says is what the public expects of an elected official, and on that level, the elected official is often the best judge of that. We have leaned towards transparency rather than, and as the Integrity Commissioner says, values-based rather than rules.
So I guess my question, if that, and I appreciate the answer, Madam Deputy Clerk, but if that is the case, then what is the requirement for a limit to what you're allowed to donate to individuals or groups within, if in fact I feel as an elected representative that I'm fulfilling my duties as an elected official, my public duties?
Mr. Mayor, two things on that last point. Page 3 of the expense report goes into, I think, quite a bit of detail about the autonomy of members and having them accountable to their constituents and to the public, and that council is an autonomous body and distinct from city staff, or for that matter, your appointed integrity commissioner. On the issue of the 3.5% cap, I have no particular integrity or ethical issue with determining what that number is. It was completely open before. It was arrived at by doing a median of the spending and the range of activities that the spending was on, and 3.5% was selected. The options are the following in terms of what is done elsewhere. Is prohibition entirely, which is done in certain municipalities like Toronto, or limiting, putting a cap on the amount that you can donate for every request. For instance, in Hamilton, it's $300 per donation maximum. Personally, I felt it would be a very big leap for this council and for your practices and what you do in supporting community groups that you do transfer funds to, not to call them donations, that you do transfer funds to in support of their objectives. The other strong policy that's already in place is that it's totally transparent. It is reported monthly in your expense budget. It's your debate, whether it's 3.5%, whether it's 5%, and it's your debate if it's to be prohibited. The 3.5 was picked as a median. Some councillors spend very little. Some councillors spend more than that amount. But I did not want to bring forward what I thought would have been a change in your political culture by putting a cap on each donation, as certain municipalities do.
Okay, thank you for that answer. In relation to travel, I appreciate the report, but I have to, maybe it's because I'm a little long in the tooth, but there's some things that I'm just not clear on. And it says members must report to the Integrity Commissioner before the first date of travel, all costs, et cetera, et cetera. And I'm not sure exactly what that means, because I'm sure, Mr. Marlowe, you are aware that I am on a number of outside agencies, Roma, Canadian Water Resources, Rideau Roundtable, Rideau Corridor Landscape Study, South Nation, et cetera, et cetera. So I do travel a bit. If, for example, I'll give you an example. I'm a South Nation Conservation Authority Vice Chair. We have an executive meeting in Winchester because it's close to the, for everyone involved. So if I go out there for our executive meeting, do I have to come to you to ask if I can travel? Because the South Nation pays my mileage. They're not allowed to pay me per diem. But do I have to come to you to ask permission to go to Winchester?
Mr. Mayor, this is that particular provision is really dealing with what's eligible body under the Code of Conduct. So this is really, if, for example, the federal government is taking a delegation to China, for example, and you're traveling and they are funding it, it is really for those things. If for example, so that's really what that's referring to, not your notion you are a delegate. If a member is a delegate and the city representative to external bodies as part of city business, that's not what this is referring to.
Okay, thank you for that. It's very helpful. Just a follow-up question, and Mr. Mayor, I think that one, I think it would be better to the deputy clerk has just outlined very clearly, and now I fully understand. But there is. I'll give you another example. The Canadian Water Resource Association, I joined that group because I'm interested in water quality, etc. I'm a director with the Ontario branch, so I'm not really appointed by the city, but as my interest in the work I do here and across the province, across Canada, I'm a member of that committee. So how does that work? For that, if I go to Toronto or Kingston, do I have to come to you to get permission to go to the Canadian Water Resource Association meeting?
The short answer, Mr. Mayor, is no.
Okay.
As well as the clerk just points out, it might be useful to come up with a clearer definition of eligible body.
Yeah.
And that could be done by way of interpretation, both out of the IC's office.
Yeah, I think that would be really helpful, because I know there are a number of council members who do travel and are on outside organizations. I'm going to have to go back on because I do have a number of questions, but this contributions, if you donate, or if a group is looking to have an event in one of our parks, and I'll give you an example. There's a group that we're going to do geocaching at the Andy Shields Park in Greeley this Saturday. They bring in 100 people. They're part of the South Nation Conservation Authority. They have a little little pancake breakfast. Then they have about 100 people there to clean up the park. They talked to me. They talked to the city about using the park. And the city told them they have to pay for the rental of that. And it kind of shocked me a bit, because you're going to get a full cleanup. So I said, I'll look after the cost, $30 or something. Is that considered a donation when you pay for time for a ball tournament on a weekend, the muscular dystrophy I support every year for the last 10 years, or the MS Bikeathon, which starts in Osgood Ward? If I donate to cover the cost of the rental of a city facility, is that considered a donation according to policy?
Mayor, we'd have to understand, is the councillor simply paying for the rental, or is he providing the donation to the organization to pay the rental?
Thank you for that question. No, I would just, we work, for example, work with the Recreation Department. I just transfer funds to them to say that the geocaching people do not have to pay for that.
That's standard business. Okay. It would not be subject to the cap.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Clerk. Mr. Mayor, I'd like to be put back on after.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Caudry.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor, and I too would like to add a thank you and a congratulations to the staff for preparing this report. This is a report that we have spoken about between myself and Deputy Clerk's office over the last number of years on some of the issues that were identified in this report. Just a couple of concerns on it, and we've had met with both the Integrity Commissioner and the Deputy City Clerk's office in the last couple of days to clarify some of those items, but I'm still a little cloudy on some of those issues. We're looking for accountability from the community associations or from the councillors' offices in terms of what we donate to the community association or help out to raise in terms of funds. I know the city grants loans, or not, sorry, loans, but grants money to some of those community associations. And maybe it's a question from Mr. Kirkpatrick. Do we ask for audited numbers from those community associations in terms of those dollars that we give out as public funds?
If Chair, if the funds that are being source of the question are under the grant policy requires for audited financial statements.
Okay, there are some funds under the grant policy, but there are funds that are given out to a community association for a Canada Day celebration, and part of those grants are either services in kind and also money donations. So those are the ones that I'm referring to.
I would, Chair or Mayor, I would have to look, and perhaps if I could take it up with you, some examples of what you're talking about and go and check. I can tell you under the grant policy for sure the requirement is the financial statements audited.
I appreciate that, Mr. Kirkpatrick, and we'll look for the answer on the sidebar. In terms of the donations or sponsorship to community associations, I have out of my office a couple of confectionery machines that I use at an event for which I buy supplies out of my office budget and help raise funds for a community association. As a matter of fact, I've just got a request just in the last half hour from a community association for that service to be used. How would those funds be covered in terms of either donation or this sponsorship?
Mr. Mayor, these are classified under community events at this time, and there's no change in that.
Thank you for that. In terms of the letters that you referred to from a question from my colleagues a few minutes ago about letters under your signature for sponsorship. In today's technology with all the social media that's out there, even though the letter may not be visible on those social media, but the request is out there from a councillor cadre to ask for money for, just recently, for my hair donations. How are those kind of things covered in terms of this report?
Mr. Mayor, as a former privacy commissioner and former access to information commissioner, these modern technologies are probably the biggest challenge we have in the context that you just described. People can flip your letter, which was addressed to someone not in the registry, to someone in the registry without your knowledge. And so I think what is important is that at source, you're comfortable that you're within the code and within the policy guidelines. If there's a complaint to my office, then the tracking will determine how it got to where it got. But I'm afraid I can offer very little guarantee against the kind of situation you described.
Thank you. In terms of coming back to community association representing or misrepresenting themselves, how are we supposed to know that as a councillor when a donation request comes in? I mean, are we supposed to investigate that request before we say yes or no? And how do we do that? What kind of resources are available from the city to be able to do that?
Councillor, in that kind of context, what the policy is recommending is that the community association make a request to you, or the community group make a request to you, be it by email or by letter. You are probably the best resource the city has to determine within your own community which communities warrant, merit, and are valid. What's been missing, I think, in the context of the audit trail or paper trail or transparency trail is that quite often you've received an oral request and you just ask staff to issue a contribution. that can be perceived without the front end of them asking against their objectives for a contribution. That can be perceived as you making simply a choice amongst friends, amongst preferred constituents, and therefore leaves you vulnerable to that interpretation. So what the policy is recommending is that whatever association, whatever group you decide to support will have sent you a written request of some form.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thanks, Councillor Caudry. Conseiller Monette, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First of all, I'd like to congratulate you. I think the report is a very good report. Most of the items in it I do support. However, I do have some questions, and I'd just like some clarification. The report indicates that transfers from councillor's budget to city services would no longer be permitted. What's the definition of city services? Does this include community associations?
Mr. Mayor, it is a question of not permitted without a motion of council, and this is really a question of actual city departments and services. So to Parks and Rec, to the Planning Department, it's not meant to cover community groups that receive funding from the city.
So you'd have to go to council every time if you want to do anything like that? Is that correct?
The notion is essentially to follow what Councillor Clark did, which is to either prepare a report or a council to provide money to additional money to an already budgeted city service. Okay.
Are donations to organizations that have already received city funding still permitted? Example, Saint Santa Fe Mario, the city gives them funds at budget time. Orleans Resource Center, city gives them funds at budget time. MIFO, the city gives them funds at budget time. But I always help out with barbecues or anytime they approach me for help in the community. Are they still permitted under those circumstances?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
It is good. The report suggests that councillors should not be making donations for profit organizations. Now, I haven't done that in many cases, but I know with the Caravibe Festival, they are a profit organization, but they also bring in 7,000 to 8,000 tourists every year to an event in Orleans. Are you not able to make any donation to an organization like that? And the second question, I guess, if I may, is are you still able to advertise with them?
No restrictions on advertising, Mr. Mayor, and if you feel that a for-profit organization and is where you want your money to go, you could request an exemption, and the city clerk and solicitor and I would consult with the Integrity Commissioner. The challenge here for for-profit organizations, and the city clerk can speak about this far better than I can, is when it becomes an issue that might contravene the Municipal Act.
Okay, so from what I hear, I'd have to go through the Integrity Commissioner, find out opinion before doing it. Thank you. It is also suggested that we do not advertise out of our wards. I have serious concerns when it comes to that. Example, CHIO Tiny Hearts magazine, that's only one example, and I'm sure councillors around the table would go on and on about different groups where they've advertised, which is outside the ward. Is that a fact, that we will not be able to do that in the future?
The intent, Mr. Mayor, is to get pre-approval where it's outside your ward, and it is, as I said, largely to deal with issues that happened as a result of the last ward boundary review. Okay.
Examples, I've supported the Ottawa Fat Cats. I've supported the Ottawa Invaders. Would that be an issue?
No, Mr. Mayor.
No. Okay. Thank you. Well, I guess I should still go through the Integrity Commissioner just to be on the safe side, if ever. Okay. I guess another example, just following up on that, East End councillors, we have a number of schools that are interrelated sort of thing. I mean, kids from my school from my area goes to Councillor Blow's school, Councillor Blais schools. There would be no restrictions and that type of thing if we wanted to advertise, say, for the Bengals or anything like that. No?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. Question on providing a copy of tickets. I don't have a problem doing that. I've always provided whatever was required, sort of thing, and it's not done on that often. But often they'll invoice us, for 2 tickets, sort of thing. Is an invoice good enough, or do you need an actual ticket stub to show?
An invoice is fine, Mr. Mayor.
Invoice is fine. Thank you. The report states that members of council will not be organizing community events. No, sorry, I think you've already answered that one. I was just going on the one that if you declare, as long as you've use my example, I've done Canada Day for seniors every year, there's no problem for that. Okay. The report states that the councillor need to remain at arm's length from disbursements of funds provided by city to organizations. I'm on the board of Central Canada Exhibition. I'm on the board of the Ottawa Hydro. Is there any issues for that type of thing?
No, Mr. Mayor, you're the city rep.
Okay. And are we also doing the ones on code of conduct right now, Mr. Mayor? Yeah, okay. Okay, and I don't know if anybody's touched this yet. When we started up the lobby registry, it was first identified that all we had to do as city councillors, all we had to do as city councillors was identify to them that they had to register. Now it seems like it's changing that we also have to police the ones that come to see us. Is that a fact, and who will be responsible for this?
Mr. Mayor, actually there is no change. The original report on the lobby registry conferred upon councillors the responsibility to monitor monthly, and if they were unsatisfied with the performance of a lobbyist in registration, to advise the IC. All we've done here is integrate it into the code as part of this code in conjunction with the lobby registry.
Time's running out. Mr. Mayor, I might go on after. I might have 2 or 3 questions after. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Excuse me. Thank you. Conseiller Desroches, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. And I also appreciated the opportunity to input and to share some of my perspective with the Integrity Commissioner when he connected with councillors in the course of his research. And one of the points, there's two issues that I had raised that I just want to clarify whether they're explicitly stated in the new Code of Conduct. One is when constituents appeal to us on bylaw infractions. So it may be a parking ticket, it may be a sign violation where a ticket has been issued. And certainly the tradition in my office has been I write them back saying, I'm really not allowed to politically intervene in a ticket, and refer them to either staff or yourself or the legal branch, and remind them that it is a legal process that councillors should not be involved in, regardless of how. In some cases, they may have a case. It's really not up to the councillor to intervene and pass judgment, since it is a judiciary process. So, is that clear in our code?
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, actually the member is absolutely correct, and I think we referenced it early on in the documentation. Members of council, with the download of the Provincial Offences Court more than a decade ago, are required by the provincial government to sign a conflict of interest declaration with regards to such matters. So you are required to refer them in. It's usually to my office or something like that. So yes, it's expressly recognized.
Okay. And the second area is where someone may have a staffing issue where I can recall years ago it was a summer student and the parents were contacting me about some of the regulations with respect to hiring. They weren't allowed to give them so much time because of various collective bargaining rules. And in consultation with legal, I mean, obviously wrote them back saying, councillors are not involved in the hiring process. We are not to have any hand in that. And I think that should be made clear.
Mr. Mayor, the member again is absolutely correct. I'll just see if we should add something to that effect, because the member is correct. We have a plethora of collective bargaining rights that we have to honor in various situations, also various pieces of legislation that we would follow. So we can look at that one, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. That's helpful. Thank you. Those are all my questions, Mr. Mayor.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just first on the community fundraising and special events policy, I think I've spoken to you about this, but I have an annual picnic. It's called Canada North Picnic, and I get about $500 from each mostly from developers who fund the picnic. According to this now, I will not be able to get that money from them. Is that correct?
Developers will be able, even those with an active registration, will be able to still contribute to your activity, but you will not be able to ask them for it, and you will have to partner with someone to approach them.
Now, if I have someone else who asks them, would the check still come into the city as it does now in the special account?
You are one of the examples that I've used in my private consultations, as well as have an account that is managed through the Deputy Clerk's office. The checks are made payable to the City of Ottawa, and that keeps you complete at arm's length from the funds.
So I get someone else to ask them, they collect the check made out to the City of Ottawa, and we pass it on to the city to put in. Okay. I think that's something that wasn't really clear in this way this is written out and could help. The same situation occurs now with the raising of the money for the Canada North Recreation Centre. I mean, I got $500,000 committed from a developer, basically, and I was commended for doing that. I know it's in progress now, but I'm going to be still doing that fundraising for at least another year. There's a lot more having to be raised, and I know it's in progress. As it simply just getting a statement from you to say I can continue to do that, because the development community is one of the places where I can get money for this. It all goes to the city or through the community foundation.
Mr. Mayor, that's correct. I'm certainly there for the comfort part. That is, if you want to discuss it with me in advance and give you assurances that you're on the right track. That's a community-directed activity as compared to a fundraising for a charity or an NGO or an NPO out there. And it's within
It's
your
actually
ward.
done by councillor as a motion.
That's right. So I would deem that to be within your councillor's responsibilities and your duties as an elected official.
Okay. Now, when you have an event, it says in election year you have to have done it 2 years before. I just happened this year to have started to do a community volunteer recognition event, so it'll only have 1 year. Does that mean I can't do it next year? Because it won't have been for 2 years.
Mayor, the member would have to seek an exemption, and it would not be allowed in the blackout period.
No, it wouldn't be in the blackout. The blackout period is after September, that period. When
The
is
blackout period begins, I believe, August.
No, it's before that.
20
Yeah, no, we're doing it in June, so it would be before that. So after the blackout period, the only one I'd be interested in is Expo 55 Plus, which has been going on for a long time. That's one we got an exemption for last time, so we could do the same thing.
Mayor, as the member knows, I am extremely familiar with that event, and it has always had an exemption.
Okay. That clarifies it a little bit. I do think that there's, and certainly I think the Ottawa Senators are not going to be very happy if we can't be invited to hockey games anymore, because they're almost all the developers want. Once a year, the Ottawa Senators invites me to something in their box. Now, I don't know if they are on the lobby list or not. Do I have to then go and check the lobby list to see if I'm invited somewhere, to see if they or any of their staff are there? Is that the idea?
That would be wise.
And if you don't find them, and then somebody says afterwards they find something that's related to that company and complains about it, you have to use your, you've done your best investigation or whatever?
Mr. Mayor, that's why the Integrity Commissioner is to take the whole context of a situation into consideration. It's not just a question of one ticket, one councillor, one corporation. There usually is a, and the policy about gifts is about registering them. Doesn't mean you can't accept something from the senators. You can, and you just declare it. But if for some reason the granting party, whether it be a company giving you senators' tickets, are in the registry, then you have to be mindful of that.
But according to this, that's not, you cannot legally do that.
It is one of the few rules where there is a specific prohibition. That's right.
Okay. The some of the contributions that we make, the gifts in kind was stated that we can't make gifts in time, but then gift baskets that we give for auctions are okay. Yeah, is this it's a little bit unclear when there's a blanket thing saying no, but then some things are okay anyway because we've been doing them. And I'm just wondering, in 5 years' time, when somebody's using this policy, they might say, well, it says here you can't do it, because I've seen that happen before in other events.
Mr. Mayor, we will be preparing very clear do's and don'ts working together. It's one of the reasons we would like the implementation to wait until July 1st on this level. The issue of material assets is, for example, that a member not buy a barbecue for a community association, but if the community association asks for a barbecue, that you give them the donation so they purchase it. Same for digital cameras. It's really, we're not talking small material assets, we're talking about actual assets.
I get the point, but it's really not clear in the policy. That's all I'm saying. And in SCA, what you do is, I think it becomes an attachment so that it's a clarification. I think that would be helpful because I know some people are very sticklers for rules, and including some of our residents, and we don't want them to be misled either.
We'll take that as direction.
Could I suggest, Mr. Mayor, that for the council meeting, because this is quite a complex and very large documents, et cetera, that we do like we do for the budget, that if we have motions, except perhaps a few that were mentioned today or similar, that we can actually send them to the clerk's department before the meeting, so that at the council meeting, so they could be able to deal with them at the council meeting in some sort of reasonable order.
We always encourage that, but in fact, people are going to be moving motions. If you'd like to move a motion and ask someone to move it.
I'm not quite sure of the wording of it yet. I wanted to hear all the debate. It's clarified a lot of things.
Okay.
And I think there may be others coming, and it would be helpful, I think, for the clerk's department if we did it that way.
Okay, good idea. Thank you.
So I will leave the others for any individual discussion that I have. I want to thank the Integrity Commissioner. I had a very long discussion with him, which helped a lot on some of these issues. But it is, I think, one of the ones we're going to have to work through. We may have to amend it later on if we find it causes problems. I just hope that everyone will be open to that, because new policy sometimes requires some tweaking.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Hubley. We get Councillor Hubley's mic on, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. I'll have to give you notice ahead of time that this is probably going to be one of the few times that I'll use my full 5 minutes and maybe even want to go back on. So, I have several questions, but first I want to start by thanking the Integrity Commissioner and the Deputy Clerk for the effort they've put in the last week to try to not only brief us as councillors on this and put aside a number of concerns that I personally had with this. Still some more I want to ask about, but also the effort, somebody mentioned earlier about the work I do with the Dragon Boat as a co-chair, and appreciate that plug from my colleagues. But I also want to recognize that both of you also discussed this policy with the Dragon Boat people and the chair of the Festivals Association, representing 80 different festivals, and help make sure that they were clear on what the new rules are going to be. So I want to thank you for that effort, and and let you know that it's appreciated. I want to clear up one thing that I believe was a response to Councillor Taylor. You mentioned that we don't need to, or I believe, if I understood you correctly, in a case like, to use the example of Dragon Boat, if they're going to do a mail out to, they usually do a bulk mailing to all the companies and schools and everybody else to see who wants to support Dragon Boat teams or the festival. Am I to provide them a list of who has active files on the lobbyist registry?
You may do so. It's fairly easy to print a list from the lobby registry as it exists, or they can consult it themselves at your suggestion and say, make sure that anything I sign doesn't go out to those with active registrations. One of the things, if Council approves this going forward, is that we'll be modifying the registry interface to include an indication of what is active and what is not active. So right now it's not clear. That box is not there to be checked by the lobbyists or by their clients, or even for me to verify if something is dormant, or I try to track what Council is doing, but every application for development, for instance, I may not know that it's finished and it's done and it's over. So we're going to be encouraging the lobbyists, once this goes through, to declare their files closed or non-active or withdrawn.
Okay, and so every effort will be made to keep that up to date for us, and so on. Okay, and but if I don't sign the letter, this doesn't apply to their ask. Is that correct? I think that's a key.
That's
point
correct,
here.
Mr. Mayor. If
okay,
you don't sign the letter, your picture can be on it if you want as honorary chair. But if you don't sign the letter, you're not calling for funds.
Thank you. Now, moving on from that, my other question was, I believe Councillor Manette touched on the use of communications across ward boundary levels. Can you define that a little better for us? Like, because of the use of social media and so on, that could very easily cross boundaries, right?
Mr. Mayor, that's not really the communications we're talking about. We're really looking at postal walks and unaddressed ad mail and targeted communications that are really related largely to ward boundary changes that will be implemented or discussed.
Okay. So thank you. And then moving on, I want to ask about the donations piece. Like currently, I have two big donations that I did last year. One was a security camera to a community building, a city-owned building, a community center, that was getting vandalized. It was costing the city a lot more money than the cost of that camera. And because corporate security did not have the funds to do that camera right away, but I wanted to save taxpayers money, I paid for that out of my budget because I had available funds there to do it. That's something we would not be able to do in the future, or is that something that we would bring to you and build our case as to why we should be allowed to do it?
Mr. Mayor, that would just be a motion at Council.
A motion at Council. Thank you. And hospitality. Under your reference to hospitality, it suggests that we have to identify the people involved by their affiliation. What does that mean? Can you expand on that? The term of affiliation, what we're looking for here?
It is if it's relevant. So if you're looking at the president of Cité Collégiale, then you should, if that's the purpose of the hospitality or the meeting, you should probably identify their affiliation as well as their name. Not probably. You would need to.
So if somebody is there at this event that I would be expensing to that, I just have to identify what their role is there. What I'm trying to get at is people wear multiple hats. They may work for one company, they may volunteer for a charity or whatever. Do I need to ask people to identify all their affiliations or just what they're there for that event for?
Only the relevant one, it needs to be identified.
Thank you. Now, one other example that I want to speak to, and I imagine some of my other colleagues have come up with this, crossing guards. They're considered an employee of the city, would that be correct? Or it's a contract?
I honestly don't know, Mr. Mayor. I'll go back and check. I would have thought it was a contract, but we can check.
Okay. Well, give you an example. Last year, we had in my ward, we introduced the first roundabout in the ward. Crossing guards were a key piece of making sure that our kids were safe getting to the school through that roundabout. One of the crossing guards was identified by city staff as one worthy of public recognition and was given a city award for that. I decided because of that situation I want to top it up with a gift basket. Is that something I'm going to be allowed to do or not under this rule? Because we talk about gifts to employees and so on here.
Mr. Mayor, presuming it's a city employee, no, you would have to pay for that personally rather than out of the office budget.
Okay. What about in a case where we have lobbyists that also wear other hats, like maybe contractors for the city? I don't want to get into identifying individuals here, but I'm thinking, again, going back to my other comment about how people wear different hats. What do we do in cases like that? Do we have to come to you and once we're aware they're wearing multiple hats, how would that work?
Much like the public elected official sometimes wears different hats, and your influence in a relationship, and I mean legitimate influence, may be relevant to a hat you're wearing other than being elected. Lobbyists have their own code of conduct and are not to put the public official in a compromised position. Hence, it really is up to the lobbyist to answer that question. My advice to a lobbyist who would come to me would be, don't do it. Even if it is under this hat that you're not lobbying, you will never be able to fully explain the perception that comes with taking an action which can be perceived to be in violation of the lobbyist code of conduct.
I would say that's very good advice. Thank you. One thing I wanted to ask, do you want me to go back on the list, Mr. Mayor? Sorry, I have 3 more questions.
Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you
Councillor
very
Shirelli.
much.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a number of questions and issues I wanted to raise. Some of them just, I think, are cleaning up intentions of the report. One, it was indicated earlier, the question about tickets to events and the requirement that is in black and white here that we have a photocopy of the physical ticket. That would have worked in the 90s, but today the majority of tickets are not physical tickets. And further, a number of members are at the point, I think, where people call up 2 days before. They say, our event is on. We want you there. Just show up. And you never actually see a physical ticket. So is the appropriate thing to do here to move a motion to remove the requirement for the physical ticket?
Mr. Mayor, we're looking for some kind of appropriate documentation that will provide some notion of a receipt.
Right.
So if it's removing a specific obligation for a ticket, I think we would prefer simply listing a variety of acceptable,
okay,
something that actually proves that a ticket was purchased.
So if we put receipt, ticket, or something, okay, so that can go into a motion. The second question is the prohibition from getting new sponsorships from people from lobbyists who are active on the lobbyist registry. At what point does a lobbyist become active, and at what point do they become inactive? I know of probably over half the situations where people start lobbying us, they decide just to not go ahead with whatever their project is, and there is no formal end. They just, as in the movie Office Space, they just don't go anymore.
for the professional lobbyists, the issue, I think, is a bit moot because they will be continuing to, once having registered, continuing to act for a series of clients. For those kind of one-time lobbyists that are captured under the bylaw, it's a little different. And that's why I said we need to modify the registry so that those kinds of cases which are now over become redundant because of another decision can be checked off in the lobby registry as completed or inactive.
So we have specific lobbyists, not to name names, but Jeff Paulowin, who will represent a number of clients, and on any one day, one of the clients will be off his list, a new one will come on. Is he declared, or is that company that he's represented declared inactive once they come off his roster?
There's two parts to your question. First, there's the lobbyist, him or herself. That's one thing. And by and large, for those who are paid lobbyists, they're probably going to be captured most of the time, and their code that you've adopted for them, which is modeled on federal code and other codes, prevents them from making those kinds of contributions. For their clients, it's the clients with inactive registration. So yes to the first part of your question. The other one, it depends. For developers, as I've had discussions with you on that, some of the larger developers are likely always going to have some kind of an active file. But we're going to amend the interface to allow lobbyists to indicate which files are active, which files are redundant, which files are closed.
Okay. All right, that makes some sense. Communication and advertising beyond ward boundary, I understand and agree with the prohibition regarding ward boundary review period and that kind of thing, but the provision reads communications and advertising. I think what you meant was direct communication and direct advertising, like direct mail type of thing. So if we make that change, would that be consistent with your intent? Because right now, the way communications is moving, it's becoming not only citywide, it's becoming global.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, I believe that would be consistent.
All right. The next one.
Just to clarify that for a moment, because I think the issue is if a councillor lives in the West End and all of a sudden starts advertising in the Orleans Star, that's inappropriate. But if it's a CHEO magazine, as Councillor Monette mentioned, that's a citywide publication, okay. So it's everyone can advertise in that. Or I think when there were boundary changes, you were involved in a situation where you were advertising in an adjoining ward using your budget when you weren't representing that ward. Yeah. This is to cut that off.
Yeah. Well, Your Worship, it's your opinion that somebody should not be advertising on issues outside their ward. But I know last term when the Capital Ward councillor came into our ward to advertise his position on Lansdowne, which was diametrically opposed to mine. I found
this would prevent that.
That would prevent that. But I thought he had the right to do that because I thought it was his right and his responsibility to advance the interests of his ward where he thought it would have impact. I thought he was completely wrong. I thought it annoyed me and everything, but I still think he had the right to do that and the responsibility to do that. So we might have to have a debate on that. Okay.
Happy to.
Okay. Next issue is on the Municipal Affairs website. In talking about the exemptions or special status of the head of council, you've illuminated and pointed out most of them, but one of them also is the duty to inform council. Now, I'm presuming that the current mayor informs council. I think the past mayors I've worked with have informed council on all material changes related to important city assets or interests. But how do we put that duty into the code of conduct?
Mr. Mayor, the statutory duties that we, cited in the reports were from the Municipal Act.
Right.
They weren't from summaries of the Ministry of Municipal Affairs website. So we used the actual language from the legislation.
Would there be a problem with putting that proactive duty in place?
From the perspective of the code is aimed at all members of council, regardless of status, and we've tried to keep it fairly, how should I say, status neutral. It applies to the mayor and its details as much as it does to a councillor and vice versa. I would be leery personally to recommend a two-tier kind of code or responsibilities that apply to some and not to others. You might be looking at what does a committee chair have to do to keep the rest of the council informed. So I would advise against that in the code. You may have other means of achieving the same end by way of policy or council resolution or whatever other options are available to you procedurally.
Okay, my last one for this round relates to the provision on confidentiality. It says that if we receive information in the course of our duties as a member of council that is presented to us in confidence, we have a responsibility to keep that in confidence. How does that jive with our responsibilities under the Municipal Act to actually make public those kinds of communications that are not exempt from being made public by the exemptions under the Municipal Act, like in-camera meetings and like confidential reports that are going to arrive at in-camera meetings?
Mr. Mayor, I'm sorry, I don't understand what the positive elements of the Municipal Act require members of council to, if I understood the question.
Okay, our right to keep things secret is defined by those in-camera provisions in the Municipal Act. If those are the things that we're supposed to keep secret, I think things beyond that, we have no particular right to keep them secret, unless I've missed something.
Mr. Mayor, we're just conferring here.
Simply writing the word confidential on a document does not make it legally confidential. If somebody says they're about to build a 75-story building in the middle of my ward and they're moving ahead with this and they're not telling anyone, I think I have the responsibility to bring it to committee or to let my community associations know about it and not just to cover it up till it happens.
Right, Mr. Mayor, I'll begin and I'll turn it over to the Integrity Commissioner. First off, just to be clear for members of the Joint Committee, you have responsibilities also under the Municipal Freedom of Information Protection and Privacy Act, and you're required to keep confidential information confidential under that, which is separate and apart from moving in closed session and receiving confidential information via that avenue. So again, personal information that you receive, you would not be entitled, you might be in breach of that particular piece of legislation if you release or disclose those types of information. Mr. Marlowe?
I'm not talking about those, though. I was talking about exactly what I said I was talking about.
Well, I think there's two sides to your question. On the one hand is where paragraph D in that confidential information states that you're not to disclose private information or confidential information that comes to you by virtue of your office, and except where you're required to do so by law or by council, for that matter. So in that particular context is sharing confidential or private information that would be to the benefit of someone else or yourself in the context of the code. It's not so much of how you decide politically that this information that you acquired by virtue of your office is relevant to council's, your duties as a councillor, to the mandate of council or to mandate of a committee. At one point it becomes a political call on your part as to what you're going to do with this information which you've acquired. It may it may be that you've acquired this because you're a councillor in confidence with a constituent. That doesn't necessarily make it in law confidential. So
that was my point. So I'm just trying to see what does this alter in any way our requirements under MFIPA or under the Municipal Act?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Does it amplify on any of those?
Councillor, you want to put yourself back on the list because your time has run out. Councillor Tierney.
All right, fine. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Obviously, this is a situation where we don't want to look for forgiveness later, so please forgive me if I ask a question that's already been asked. I just would like it to be on the record so I don't make an error. First of all, when it comes to, I was at the Gloucester Food Bank last night, and they do receive grants from the City of Ottawa. They have some new financial stipulations in place now. In the past, they reported they had to do audits every second year. Now it's every year. They have new pressures. No new money from the city. On the same note, I have donated to them in the past. It's an important cause in my community. Will I be able to continue this practice?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Would this also apply to Club Richelieu? I'm unfamiliar if they do receive money from the city, but I just want to make sure there's no issue there.
There's no issue, Mr. Mayor.
Same going with the Eastern Ottawa Resource Centre. They do a lot of work with women that have been battered, a lot of snow-go programs and things in the community, but they do depend heavily on city funding. Is there any issue with that?
No, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you. When it comes to events, in the past, I noticed in the report there was a discussion about Ward 11 having a count. I want to confirm that that count no longer exists as of this term of council.
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
And I made that conscious decision because, and it's my decision, my colleagues, this is no disrespect to them, I decided not to call it after myself. I decided my community was probably better at naming it, and they've called it Celebrate Summer Fair, Celebrate, and it reflects the community I live in. It is a standalone committee run by the Community Association, but I do lend my name to that, and I do go and take part in the festivities and actually sponsor that. Is there any issues with that?
No, Mr. Mayor.
When it comes to, in the past, we know what's happened with stages within communities. We've seen a Blues Fest one topple over. It's become a big issue. So now liability on stage rentals and different things like stage rentals have become very expensive. And I've helped out in the past because these stages and the insurance and liability that goes along with them is quite high. Would there be any objection? Would that be considered a donation, or is it a purchase of service for a community event?
We've categorized that as a donation, Mr. Mayor.
So knowing that it would be categorized as a donation, a typical stage, a small stage, is $3,700 to rent. This is a large cost to a community. Typically, they always pay back. I've always recovered that money in the past. I did last year. But it is a new pressure for them. We also mothballed our Shea 106 stage a couple of years ago. It was in disrepair. We got rid of it. I think this is a whole other discussion we have to have in regards to trying to find a way to provide to these community events. We love our festivals, love our events, about finding something that we can do for these community events. Otherwise, they're going to have difficulties getting these stages. So I'll bring that up at a different time. The 2-year event issue. So let me be clear on this. I have to have the event 2 years in a row, so like Celebrate Summer, for example. And during the election year, I would be allowed to take part in that event.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
And in a situation, and I know the mayor throws his Canada Day pancake breakfast all the time. Obviously, there's no building for it. He doesn't have it. That's a bit of a break year, so it's not 2 consecutive years prior to an election year. Is that a situation where we'd have to ask for an exemption?
No, Mr. Mayor, that's actually a protocol-sponsored event.
Oh, okay. There's also another section when it comes to Section 5.1 with contributions, it says the purchase of material assets as a contribution is prohibited. So I assume, and forgive me, I think this was asked already, if we want to buy mugs or whatever we want to put into a basket rather than give money to an event, that would be prohibited?
No, Mr. Mayor. Those expenses are all under the communications and marketing budgets. This is really referring again to physical donations of equipment. So typically it's a prohibition on buying a barbecue to donate to a community association. The preference is you give the money to the community association and they buy the barbecue, they buy the digital camera, they buy the bike racks.
Okay, that's of some comfort, actually. When it comes to the tickets, it sounds like that's going to get amended, the phrase of it, by the time it gets to council to say, you know, electronic invoice is satisfactory, you don't need to photocopy tickets anymore. Is that correct?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
And I guess the other thing is, it's great to talk about the policy part, but from a visual aspect, how would this appear? Would this appear on the website, I assume? Is it all jumbled in with our current office postings? Is there a separate tab? I'm just trying to visualize how this would look.
Is the member referring to the gifts registry, Mr. Mayor, or the disclosure?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear there. What was that again?
If it's the gifts registry or the additional disclosure, yes, it will be in the same site. If it's approved, we're going to go away and work with web services on how to best cite it, but it will be on the Accountability and Transparency website. How we append the gifts registry is something we need to work with web services on how best to go about it. We envisioned it being on exactly the same page, but we need to work with web services to ensure that our vision of it is doable.
If I could just, I don't know if this would be, I'm not on this committee, so I can't even vote, and I can't even really give direction, but through you, Mr. Mayor, maybe if we can have kind of a visual what that would look like by the time we get to, this comes to council, it might be a little bit helpful. Like, is this, or at least define, is this going to be a monthly posting by member, or is this going to be, like, I'm just trying to visualize what this will be, because right now I think we're still back at February for our office budget, so I just want to know how this is going to align with that, or if it's completely separate.
Mr. Mayor, it will be separate. The disclosure will be quarterly. I think that to get a mock-up in time for council, we can do our best. Certainly, we can ask web services to do something, but failing that, we can certainly do what we generally do, which is bring it around to members of council prior to us actually going live and showing them as well to go from there to manage transparency. But it will be quarterly as opposed to monthly.
Okay, great. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McCrae.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Mayor, I want to start again by commenting on the work that our staff and our Integrity Commissioner have done on this package. I know in speaking to the Deputy City Clerk on other issues, and I think some days we should have walkie-talkies because I communicate so often with the Deputy about issues. I know how much work has been done on this, and I know our staff humbly, and I don't always agree, don't want to take credit for good work or say it's my job. I want to point out what a good job they've done and what a good job the Integrity Commissioner has done in making sure that he meets with us and has kept us in the loop so that this has been a relatively non-surprising report in terms of what's in it. So I wanted to say thank you, Mr. Mayor, to our staff. And Mr. Mayor, I want to begin by moving a motion, and I'll read my motion. Be it resolved that there be full disclosure on all gifts, benefits, and hospitality received that exceed $30 from one source in a calendar year. And I think, Mr. Mayor, this helps me personally. I know that there's a difference of opinion on what the threshold would be, but it lines up with our gift ticket policy that's already in the document. So I want to table that motion now, and we can vote on that at a different time. But I want to ask, through you, Mr. Mayor, any one of the three, whether it's the Integrity Commissioner or the Clerk or Deputy, in terms of the lobbyist registry, why is it that we're not adding major corporations that do significant material business with the city to the list of people that we should not be accepting benefits from? Because lobbyists, one thing, Mr. Mayor, and those are people with active files, but I'm questioning that notion of the policy.
Mr. Mayor, the advice the councillors will be hearing from me heretofore is the best policy is no gifts. That's where I think councillors should be starting from as a personal position, allowing in that context for not offending the giving party, that is sometimes a cultural group or an international delegation or that sort of thing, where it would not be well understood if a councillor or a chair took that position. The threshold of $200 is not the highest in the jurisdictions.
I'm not speaking threshold, right, Mr. Mayor. I'm speaking who.
Who. In terms of the who, I took into account the practice in the City of Toronto, which is the only other city that has a lobby registry, and it's limited to those who have active files, lobbyists and their clients who have active files. To extend that to all corporations doing business with the city.
Material business.
Material business with the city, or have long-term, short-term contracts. Once the RFP process is over and has been granted, would be a policy decision, I would say.
Okay.
And it would certainly add to the rigor of the gift registry. But starting from the basis that I believe no gifts is the best position, I certainly would not object to you advancing that kind of proposal.
Okay, so Mr. Mayor, I may work on that motion. I'm not sure if I'll do that today or not, because I have not given notice to the Integrity Commissioner, and I may need help with the wording on that before the next council meeting. And you know, Mr. Mayor, through you, there are times when councillors, and I know yourself sometimes receive gifts, councillors receive gifts, and I don't think anyone has said that our mayor, for example, if someone gives you a hockey jersey and you're representing our council in our city of 1 million people, that it's not appropriate for our mayor to accept that or a councillor. But I think the question becomes, when do we disclose that information? And I appreciate that there's a lot of information here about disclosure. The second question I have with regards to this policy, and you mentioned the RFP process, Mr. Marlowe. Could you provide your thoughts with regards to that in terms of sometimes our offices get contacted by businesses that want to pursue products, and my policy has been to direct them only to the procurement officer and to keep that arm's length distance between councillors and businesses. And again, if the deputy clerk or the clerk want to answer that, I'd be curious what the comment on that is. Because I had a situation today where a procurement officer did not want to pursue a file, and the person said, well, I'll just go run in the media and say the city won't meet with me because the councillor won't. And I said, great, go ahead and do it. Because I shouldn't be having those kinds of meetings to pursue people's personal products. We have a procurement office for that. So I'm wondering if I could hear feedback on that, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor, from the purchasing bylaw and from the procurement perspective, I think the councillor's practice of referring those individual inquiries back to the chief procurement officer of the corporation is an excellent one. With regards to live or ongoing procurement processes, of course, this council has already adopted a single person and a single point of contact approach. So anything with regards to those existing ones would also go there. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Marlowe to talk about the broader issue with the lobbying.
Okay, thank you.
Obviously, I'm aware of the procurement policy in the context of lobbying within that, and lobbyists well know that they're precluded from doing so. There is a gray area where someone may approach you about services they can offer to the city as part of a lobbying initiative. To make you aware, to communicate information to you, and to find out where they should go with it next.
That's different.
that may be different, and it may be registrable as an activity,
Sure.
not a legitimate, but registrable lobbying activity. It's not black and white on that side of the lobbying registry. I think in terms of interfering in the procurement process, the city is pretty on sound ground, I think.
Sure, and through the mayor, I would never expect any of our colleagues would interfere, and I think there's definitely great opportunities where we can bring people together, and that's always appropriate, because sometimes we meet someone at a public event and they say, hey, I've got this great product, who do I talk to? And we can often have meetings, but I think once we make the connection, it should be codified. So we've got something to point to as well, because quite often people can be very aggressive in thinking that they can use a political connection to actually get their product or their service on board. And we've dealt with different agencies offering graffiti removal and different products. And I guess the last question I have, Mr. Mayor, right now, unless something else comes up that another colleague asked, the protocol budget was referred to, and again, this is a G8 nations capital, and we need to have a protocol office, and no one has ever disputed that. We don't have one of the finest officers, but to put to end, I think, the notion that people are concerned about disclosure, is that not in a governance document already? So can we just clarify that for the record, that we've dealt with it, we passed it, and we're moving on, and we'll disclose that?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, that was all done.
And that was months ago, correct? Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor. That's it for now.
Thanks, Councillor. Second round, Councillor Eglai.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just have one quick question, and then I'm going to take this opportunity to introduce a couple of short motions. This question is on actually on behalf of Councillor Tierney, who ran out of time, and his question was on the proposed cap. For this particular year, how is that going to work? Is it going to be prorated? Will it go into effect in 2014? What's the mechanics behind that?
We're at Council's direction on that, Mr. Mayor. The policy we've discussed is the policy is not retroactive. If a member of Council has gone over the cap by the time it comes into place, there's really no role here for staff. If they haven't, we will monitor till they get to the cap.
Okay, thank you for that. So in terms of motions, Mr. Mayor, let me start by saying once again that I'm thankful for this meeting. I think it's been good to have a lot of us in the same room asking good questions and collectively getting the same answer, so we're all on the same page going forward on this very important issue. Because we're going to set a standard here that's going to impact not only on this council but on councils going forward. So it's an important discussion that we're having today. Secondly, let me say that I'm largely pleased with the answers that I've heard to the questions that have been asked and to the bulk of the report. I am going to go back, though, to the concern I raised by my community associations about the level of the cap. Not whether there should be a cap, but whether the 3.5 is a reasonable number. And I want to be able to do my job, and I feel quite strongly that part of my job is to create and to foster community partnerships, to work with my community associations, my service clubs in the wards, my schools, my churches, and to bring a real sense of community to Knoxdale-Mirabel. And I think I speak for all of us when I say that's what councillors want to do. That's what we strive to do. And the concept of a cap, again, makes some good sense so that we treat the money, which is the residents' money, respectfully. But part of that respect, as I say, is in fostering these relationships, fostering these this community spirit, these community events. And as I say, I want to be able to do that. I think my colleagues want to be able to do that. And I think our constituents want us to be able to do that as well. And I think if I can just quote from an email I got from a community association president, he says, "The only question I have is in regard to the percentage cap that should be applied to the contributions to organizations in the ward. It seems obvious that some areas of the city may at a given time need more community building activities than others, and a cap somewhat higher than 3.5% may well be appropriate. I would encourage Council to have that discussion today. And I'm pleased that we are having that discussion. I would suggest that my motion, which I'm going to introduce, to increase the cap from 3.5% to 5%. That 1.5 will provide that cushion to meet the needs that are set out in that email that I just read from the Community Association President. It will help to make sure and ensure that in those areas, in those years where things may not go quite as well for a community association, where an issue may come up that you haven't seen before, you will have that cushion, that ability to respond to that concern and to deal with it. So the first motion I want to introduce then, I don't know if Clerk can put it up on the screen, it's a very short one, but it says, whereas there is a concern amongst community it says committee associations, it should read community associations, we'll fix that a cap on sponsorship contributions and donations will impact on their ability to carry on regular activities. And whereas there is a common good for Ottawa residents in fostering community partnerships, therefore be it resolved that the hearing report be amended so as to increase the proposed 3.5% cap to 5%. And I hope that I have the support of my colleagues going forward on that, because I think it's a reasonable amount and I think it responds to a reasonable concern raised by our residents and our community groups and associations. The second motion is more procedural in nature, and it simply is, whereas there is a desire for further clarity regarding the provision in the community fundraising and special events policy related to council member organized community events, therefore be it resolved that the 7th bullet, page 57, and I'll take staff's word on it, it's page 57, be amended to read, in an election year, a member of council must not seek donations and sponsorships for any event that has not been staged in the previous 2 years, nor accept donations or stage any new event, the key word there being new, supported by donations and sponsorships after he or she has filed nomination papers for election to any office in the City of Ottawa. And again, that's more procedural and housekeeping than anything else, but I would hope that that would carry as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of specific questions. The city staff, and I've been at committees where they're working on a project and as another project comes and city staffs have asked to transfer funds to that other project, and the question comes out, are you still within your budget? Does that apply to councillors as well?
Mr. Mayor, that's actually why we're recommending that transfers to city budgets be done by way of motion of council.
Okay. Thank you very much. A couple of specific questions. Marionville, a little village, the southeast corner of the ward. 2/3 of it is in the township of Osgood, and the remaining third is split between North Dundas and the City of Ottawa, Osgood ward. They operate a rink. It's on the Russell side. And I've asked city staff, why can't we donate to the township of North Dundas donates because some of their residents use that rink. I've asked city staff repeatedly, why can't we donate? We donate to other rinks in the community. Why can't we, the city, donate money to that organization? I've been told that it's just not within our mandate. So that requires me to, and I feel obligated because we've always done that in the former township of Osgood, and I feel it is important. I just don't understand, and this is more of perhaps a policy question, why that can't change, because it costs me money out of my budget to donate, which is a city function.
Mr. Mayor, we'd be pleased to look at that offline prior to the council meeting. We can see what we can do.
I would be so pleased if you would. I'm just trying to knock down some of my donation requests. In regard to gift baskets, I just want to be very clear, because my office, like many others, we donate baskets to fundraisers. And what we've done is, in order to save money for the city, and I think the deputy clerk would realize that over the last 11 or 11 and a half years, I've returned unspent over $970,000 that I could have spent but didn't. So we're very frugal. We go out and buy stuff to donate baskets, and I brought one down here just as a display. Is that, how do we account for those expenses? If we go out and spend, we go to different stores, buy stuff, is that classified as donations or as a gift basket? Do we put a value on that and say I donated to the Ringette organization a gift basket worth $100, or I'm not sure how to, I don't comprehend how to deal with that.
Mr. Mayor, the current practice essentially applies, which is, when a member of council does, as Councillor Thompson does, where purchases different sets of supplies, they're still listed as supplies for donations for gift baskets. They go under the category of donations. It would essentially be no change.
Okay. So, sorry, I was looking at my notes. So the money that I spend in buying for those gift baskets, how do I account for that?
The same way you do now, Mr. Mayor, which is donations.
I want to be very careful because I'm just in great dread when I get a call from the Deputy City Clerk or Chris Parsons to come down to talk to me about my donations. Just want to be clear on, they're probably worse than the Integrity Commissioner. If the city, and this question was asked, if the city sponsors an event like the Metcalf Fair, there are funds, they apply to the city and get grants from the city. I also make a donation to Osgood Ward / City of Ottawa Day. Can I still do that?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. All right. So, Mr. Mayor, those are all my questions.
Thank you, Councillor. Mr.
Mayor, could I just one other thing? This is specific to the Greeley Library. A number of councillors have in the past donated funds, last 2 years, to libraries. That's a city organization that pays for extra programming. Is that still an eligible donation?
You would need a motion at council, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
And the other option for those of you who want to be generous with the library is at budget time. If the library you feel is underfunded, cut somewhere else and add to the budget of the library. It's as simple as that. Okay, Councillor Monette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a couple of more questions. What will be the yearly costs associated with accountability, transparency measures that is in this report? I know in the City of Toronto, in the report it says it's $6.5 million. Obviously, we're not looking at figures like that. Do we have any figures how much it will be for City of Ottawa?
Mr. Mayor, save and except for the funds we pay to the Integrity Commissioner, everything else is done in-house within existing budgets.
Okay. Do we have any estimate as to how much that will be?
Mr. Mayor, in terms of the Integrity Commissioner or just in general?
In general, I mean, there'll be obviously a lot of work involved in especially in the first year, I would imagine, in dealing with different requests and formal and informal complaints that will be coming in. And I'm not looking at the exact, I'm looking at ballpark, how much, I mean, like I say, $6.5 million in Toronto, and obviously we're not looking at that type of figure, but is there any way of, giving me an idea as to ballpark, what we'd be looking at?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, this was actually incorporated into the Advisory Committee renewal report, which is the notion of the FTEs associated with this would be repurposed to supporting the Integrity Commissioner and any of the administrative additional burdens here. It was $120,000.
Okay. Also, I mean, there's a lot, I mean, the report is huge, obviously, and councillors around the table, we've all went through it. Our staff went through it. But will there be an orientation session for the councillor staff? I think as we move forward, it's going to be something that's going to be very important that they have a good handle on.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we're going to prepare some orientation sessions for councillors. So I'm certainly prepared, as is the Deputy Clerk, to meet individually with councils going forward as well, and one for staff as well.
And final one is, it says somewhere in the report that I saw in it about hiring family members, which I don't have any family members working for me, but it also says about hiring friends. What's the definition, where is that going, that comment? I mean, obviously I'm not going to hire any enemies. If I was going to hire any enemies, I'd be stuck hiring someone like Phil McNeely that will be looking for work pretty soon.
Mr. Mayor, the notion was for people to be mindful of what was already in the Code of Conduct with respect to improper use of influence. The notion is if you have a question about how close someone is to you, if you're giving them a contract, to ask the Integrity Commissioner.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hubley.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a question I want to ask, and it's come up a little bit with the baskets that everybody's asking around that. When I was reading your report, I was wondering why you didn't recommend that we do as the mayor's office would do, and if we get a request for a basket, just send it to protocol and allow protocol to send out a standard basket on behalf of, it could include a card that says the mayor and council, and I think we would be saving an awful lot of money, because I've been to events where there may be 10 baskets from councillors at an event, and that would be a way that's going to take a lot of the money, as Councillor Thompson was saying. That's a lot of the donation money in several councillors' budgets. Did we give any consideration to something like that to save some tax dollars?
Mr. Mayor, this is about a council budget expense policy, not the bureaucratic protocol budget, which is dealt with as part of the normal budget every year.
Is this not a good way that we could help, though, with the councillor's budget? Yes, it impacts on the bureaucratic budget, but we're talking about gift baskets. Is it something we can explore? Put it that way. I don't have to necessarily move a motion today.
But, Councillor, the protocol budget is funded by taxpayers, so I don't quite understand how that's going to save taxpayers money by shifting your need for baskets to another department. Can you explain how that's going to save money?
Sure. It's going to standardize the baskets, Mr. Mayor, that there'll be one basket going out from the city instead of each of us sending individual baskets out to the same request. And so right there you're saving money in volume, but also it's going to be what I would anticipate seeing as a standardized basket. Number of City of Ottawa gifts included in a bin, and a nice little card attached to it.
So it'd be charged back to each person's office then?
It could be done that way, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, it's just to put it all together into one. So we can look at this?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we could look at that.
Okay. Does that require a direction or a motion, or how do we go about looking at this?
Mr. Mayor, I think a direction is fine for staff at this point.
Okay. Then if we're in agreement, I'll give the direction, or you can give the direction, Mr. Mayor, whatever
I think you might want to check with your colleagues, because I think some of them like to personalize the baskets with products from their own ward. So, I don't think we want the protocol office turning into a basket operation, but, there are other private companies that could do that probably
I've seen
cheaper.
some of your baskets. They do a better job than my office at times, so I'm more than happy to have them take it on for me if my colleagues are in agreement.
And if they charge back to you, I don't see a problem with that.
Okay, I'll follow that up then before the council meeting with my colleagues and see if others are interested. Also, my last question will be, I want to get a little clarification around, in different parts of the report, we talk about the office of an individual member of council versus the councillor or the mayor. Can you expand on that a little bit? How do we, for next year, for example, when we get into the coming up to the election period and that, there are events such as public meetings and that we have to attend as the councillor. You expand in here on what the mayor will be able to do because there's a distinction to the office of the mayor, but how is that going to work for councillors?
Mr. Mayor, we will be running an entire training session for members of council starting in October and November on the election-related resources policy. This is a very standard operation. We provide training to the mayor's staff, we provide, and the mayor, we provide training to members and their staff. We provide training for clerk staff that work supporting the mayor and councillors. It's a fairly comprehensive and routine matter that we do every 4 years.
So nothing we're doing here today with this package will impact that?
It'll provide a few more slides for the training.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Great, thank you. Councillor Shirelli.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have nothing further to add to the basket debate. But on the, I think one thing that this discussion has helped do is really underscore the misconception some people had about our budgets. They're called constituency service budgets. They're not called office budgets, and that is because they are there to finance the operation of the office, but also to provide constituent service and constituent outreach. And that's why it's called what it's called, and so it shouldn't surprise people that the functions correspond with exactly what the title is. I have a couple of questions. One deals with the lobbyist registry. I know we had previously not accepted the idea of the double-ended registry. Now this seems to be some sort of a hybrid, but one of the notions in here is that if we detect a lobbyist who has lobbied us but has not filed with the lobbyist registry, that we're supposed to then inform them. That can get really difficult. Like, I don't know where most of these people even live. I don't know necessarily what the proper name of the company you would find them at would be. You would know the company that's doing the particular project, but it may not even have a phone. You know some of the top, the best known ones, but what do we do in the case where we just don't know where they are?
Following up on the adoption of the lobby registry bylaw, I wouldn't quite call it a hybrid formula. It's just that it follows through on what was in that report, that councillors should monthly have an eye out to who has and has not registered. That is merely to mitigate your own risks politically. It may be that a lobbyist does not register purposely or by accident, and the perception could be is that not only are you tolerant of that under the bylaw, but you may be in collusion with a lobbyist who refuses to register. So, but in those situations where you encounter difficulty in establishing the whereabouts of a lobbyist, or for that matter where it might be politically sensitive for you to follow through, then simply a call to my office and we will follow through. That's what we're there for.
All right, that's good. Second, these are unrelated things, and presumably I'll have motions coming on them. They won't be ready today, but I'll correspond with Mr. O'Connor. Back on receiving tickets, on the question of receiving tickets, if we receive not a ticket but a free admission to an event, how can we change the wording of this so that we capture the free admission? Now, Mr. O'Connor has given me one set of wording for that, and I'm wondering if he's passed it by you and whether you concur with that.
Yes, I concur.
Okay. Next, relating to hospitality, we already have a lobbyist registry, so people who we are having business meetings with who are lobbying us presumably are already captured by that. They should be, anyway. So the troubling two parts I see to this, one of them is where we're asked for the affiliation of the person with whom we are having a meeting. Considering those people who aren't lobbyists may just be individuals who are advising us of particular problems or issues they have with their personal area. It would be like casework, that kind of thing. How do we, what are we gaining by asking for the affiliation? And is that worth the diminishment of privacy of the individual that we're dealing with? Now, I know information commissioners have said that information we gather on these people is public, but there's no stare decisis process in the Information Commissioner world. They don't operate by precedent. And the reason that information is divulgeable is that we're collecting it in the first place. So I know it's not a word, sorry. So what is it we're trying to get, and is it really worth the diminishment of the privacy of the resident who may be meeting with us? That is, if they're not a lobbyist.
The requirement to list the affiliation is only if it's relevant to the purpose of the meeting, of the business hospitality.
Okay. So when would that be?
Mr. Mayor, Council has already voted on what's required in terms of public disclosure, in terms of names, and the notion of affiliation is if it's relevant to the purpose of the hospitality. That's the only requirement.
So are we changing anything from what we do now with this?
No, Mr. Mayor.
All right. Okay. And then, let's see if I have time. Oh, yeah, for the exemption for over 10 people attending at an event, I want to know how I can change the wording such that if I have 15 people volunteering out, handing out flyers, and we buy a stack of pizzas and 2 special meals for dietary reasons, that I don't have to name the 2 just because they're on a separate invoice. How do I do that?
Mr. Mayor, just submit it and submit all the receipts for that indicate it's the same time and largely the same location and that it's for dietary reasons.
Okay, well, I don't even have to say it's dietary reasons, do I? Okay. All right, that's it for now. I'm out of time.
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, I have some observations, I guess. We have a lot of city grant programs, and clearly they're inadequate because we have all this other patchwork stuff to try to supplement it, and that's what councillors do. I think that the whole notion of this office services or councillors' services, councillors' office budgets, whatever you want to call them, was given to councillors to expend on a discretionary basis. This report is seen to some extent to remove some of the discretionary power of councillors as opposed to just deal with the notion that we started out with, which was to develop a more transparent operation. And that is something that, from my perspective, is probably not warranted by the situation. I have no evidence that councillors are not doing a conscientious job. I'm not so sure about the protocol office. That's just a joke, by the way, aimed in one direction only. But I think that the need to look at this report, which was pretty thorough, there's some things in there. The use of confidential information, I firmly believe that's a good thing to have in there. I have a little bit of a problem with no code complaints after 1st of July in election year. If a code complaint exists, it should happen no matter when it is. Personally, I think that's an unnecessary distinction. I also think we should be distinguishing between sponsoring / city community partnerships versus pure donations. And the third element of that is spending on fundraising events. Well, spending on fundraising events as a community partnership or as a donation? And, you know, there's fine lines there. And if you just lump them all together because you can't distinguish them, I think that's inappropriate. And I think we need to maybe tidy that up. As far as donations, well, I don't do it from the office budget. I just believe personally that that's taxpayers' money, and I have no authority to make donations on behalf of my taxpayer. I do have authority, of course, to write personal checks, and I do that with some frequency, maybe not as much as the charities would like. But by developing this methodology of councillors making donations, I find that I'm inundated weekly on the email for donations. And my answer is this office doesn't do donations because I feel, for me at least, it's inappropriate. On the other hand, the communities that are being served on the community partnership side have to be recognized. That's a useful and very valid thing for a councillor to be doing. And to call that donations and put it under the 3.5% cap is probably inappropriate. So the notion of whether there's a cap required or not, I'd really like to know how many councillors spent above that cap last year and how much of it was on the basis of community partnership spending, because it would be useful information in order to help make this decision. As I said, my view is 3.5% is way too high, but the reality is if you take out all those community partnerships and sponsorships, then we don't have a problem at all. What problem are we solving? And that's, well, yeah, or just make it all free. Just raise it all on taxes. Yeah, but the point is that the notion is that there is somehow or other a problem being solved is something I think is wrong. I think that I haven't seen any evidence of a problem. I've certainly seen an evidence of needing to go along the transparency route. That's incontrovertible. Do you like that word? As opposed to some of these other big ones. I am convinced that we need this report. We need to follow it. I'm not sure that we're distinguishing donations versus community activity sufficiently in my mind. And therefore, I really have no view on the cap. I can't support somebody raising it or lowering it because I have no information. And that information is very important if we're going to make this decision. I think I ran out of time.
Thanks,
I did promise you 20 minutes, Mr. Mayor, but I ran out.
Thank you. Councillor Hobbs.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I won't take up my 5 minutes, but I did just want to make a comment and sort of talk in general. I really appreciate what's been offered to us today in this report, and also all of the in-depth review and the amount of support that we've received on this from Mr. Marlowe and also from the clerk's office. Thank you very much for that, because I came into this really understanding what the intent was, and I appreciate all of that help. In terms of my feeling about it, this doesn't hamper us at all. This protects us. And I just don't feel the constraints in here. I feel this is something that will be good for me. I understand that as an elected official, I am held to a higher standard. I have a higher level of duty to uphold, and I'm willing to do that. That's part of this job. I also feel that there are a lot of other things I can do to contribute to community that don't involve just writing checks. And I spend an awful lot of time, and this may be a reflection on my sorry life that I don't do very much in the evening on the weekend, but it allows me to spend some time to eat pie and eat chili and dance on stage if I need to raise funds for the community. And so those are the things that I'm willing to do, and I'll do them till the cows come home, and they don't cost any money, but I think they do contribute to the community. I do appreciate, though, being able to help when I can. Like Councillor Clark, I'm not sure what that amount is, but so I'm not prepared to go any higher today, because I would probably go closer to zero. This is not my money, it's taxpayers' money. And it's not just my area that I was elected to represent, but it is the entire city. And to have the entire city think that, some ward is getting all these gift baskets and they're not, I just want to make sure that everybody has a good feeling about what their taxpayers' money is used for. And so, I'm not going to be doing anything but supporting this report as it is today. Thanks.
Right. Thank you. Other comments? Est-ce qu'il y a des autres commentaires?
Other comments?
A couple of comments. First of all, I'll echo what a number of you have already said. Our sincere thanks to the Integrity Commissioner, Mr. Marlowe, and the Clerk and the Deputy Clerk for the work that they've done, not only on this, but the other elements of the integrity package. And they first put together the lobbyist registry. It was not because, as the Clerk pointed, or the Integrity Commissioner pointed out, because of an ethical crisis, but simply we wanted to do the right thing. And in both efforts, we wanted to provide greater transparency for our community to be able to see the operations of their City of Ottawa. For the same reason, we brought forward a position of Integrity Commissioner, and we found the perfect person to fill the role, who has immense experience, the former Clerk of the House of Commons, Bob Marlowe. He literally wrote the book on Commons procedure and also served as Canada's Information Commissioner. And Mr. Marlowe is an enormous resource for individual councillors, and I know many councillors have consulted his advice over the last several months on matters related to the lobbyist registry and other ethical questions that may arise. And in our most recent governance renewal, we also brought in requirement to post summaries of spending on the protocol office by the City of Ottawa. Once again, this is a proactive step to provide the public information on the machinery of our government here in the nation's capital. And at the same time, we put in mechanisms to provide postings for all executed contracts above a $100,000 threshold. There were those who said that this could not be done. There are others that said it wasn't worth the effort, and I think the naysayers have been proven to be wrong. Now, today we consider the final pieces of our integrity package: a code of conduct, a gift registry, a council expense policy, and lastly, the community fundraising and special events policy. The two reports before us represent a very large amount of work carried out by the Integrity Commissioner and the Office of City Clerk and Solicitor. And I can tell you, you look at this report and the background material, the Deputy Clerk and the Integrity Commissioner and the staff like Zian and others, Joel, worked extremely hard to get us to this stage. And there's been a great deal of external and internal research completed. The Integrity Commissioner, as directed at the time he was installed, has met with each and every member of Council, and your input has been key to what we see in front of us. The Clerk's office, under the direction of the Clerk and Deputy Clerk, has been diligent in accumulating best practices, scouring communities from coast to coast, and taking together this work constitutes, in my opinion, an excellent finishing touch to our openness and transparency agenda. The Code of Conduct reflects our sincere shared desire to be the very best that each of us can be as we carry out our duties as elected official. It puts in writing what we do every day. The high standards under which we operate are codified for all to see, not just for today and our council, but for the future. The Gifts Registry similarly reflects a desire to bring transparency to this aspect of public life. It does not set impossible to meet standards, and it does not impose a process that will drown us all in paperwork. Rather, it will require us to meet certain requirements. For example, a $200 threshold for gift reporting that are a sensible reflection of both our own experience and that of other jurisdictions. These requirements and the others in the report will not impede our conduct of business on behalf of the residents in the city. The Code and Gifts Registry provisions will apply to all members of Council, myself included. The same applies for the expense policy and community and fundraising special events policy. The provisions are essentially common sense and reflect what we do today, as we heard from many of the answers, all of which will make us more transparent to the public. That increased disclosure really is the centerpiece of the entire integrity package that we brought forward during our term on Council. We're making our actions and activities and how we spend our tax dollars funded more open to public scrutiny. And the proposals today are not going to add, as I mentioned, onerous paperwork for charities or community groups. They will put in writing a sensible approach. If a community group wants a donation from one of us, they have to send us an email so there is a record. And I think, as Councillor Hobbs reminded us, this is not our money. This is the public's money. And many of you have talked about the cap. My answer is, if you want to be generous, dig into your own pocket. If you want to go and help the Union Mission, write a check on your own personal bank account. Every other citizen has to do it. They don't rely on an account from City Hall. You want to go out and be generous to the United Way or to a charity, and you don't have the funds in your budget, then do like every other citizen has to do, contribute personally. And many members of Council do that. I know that for a fact. And we'll see the overall limit on how much we can give to these budgets. I think the 3.5%, the vast majority of people on Council in the last 2 years have been below the 3.5%. A few have been substantially above it, but I think the 3.5%, as the clerk indicated, is a reasonable amount. And the limit itself makes sense in this day and age of tax and spending restraints. We're asking every other group to tighten their belts. I think we should be doing the same. If we lend our name to a charity, as many of us do, common sense rules will prevail. We cannot send letters asking for money to people with active lobbying files. That's simple common sense. It's done at the provincial and federal levels, and it works very well. We also cannot handle the money directly, and we do not decide who is getting the money that any charity dispenses. Again, this makes good sense and keeps us out of any real or perceived conflict of interest. The policy asks you that you encourage the group to provide audited statements for the event, but there is no absolute requirement for that. And if we travel on city business using city funds, regardless of what it is, Roma or any other organization, then we have the ability under these rules and the right to ensure that the public knows where we're traveling and how much. Should be no embarrassment. If you're proud about the work you're doing on all of these different groups, then be upfront about it, and the public should know the detail. These recommendations also include a common sense approach to events in an election year. Finally, all of these proposals are come into effect on July 1st. And on the election year, many of us who were non-incumbents were angry with the incumbents because of the money they spent during election year. Now, all of a sudden, we're the incumbents, and we're getting cold feet about it. Well, I had a number of you come and talk to me about how outrageous it was that councillors were sending out flyers in the month of September. And now, all of a sudden, we've put some parameters on that, so we will not be able to do the same thing, but we'll have a period of time, I believe it's 60 days, prior to the election, that you can't go and take taxpayer-funded brochures and send them into your wards really at the height of an election. So I said earlier that these are a finishing touch on transparency and accountability agenda. I think the staff deserve a great deal of credit. And I have to say to my colleagues on council, these kinds of issues are never easy. It makes us all uncomfortable. I think you probably have to admit that. And it allows the public to see how decisions are made. And I'm not disputing the motives or integrity of people that want to do good things for their constituents. But at some point, I think we all have to realize that perhaps the pendulum has swung too far to one side, where we have cases where councillors are using their funds to pay people's water bills, wastewater dispute, trips to Carnegie Hall, a trip to Norway. I don't think that's appropriate. Maybe I'm old-fashioned, but these kinds of things should not be coming out of an office budget to benefit one individual person. We all know hardship cases, and I don't have a cold heart. It's not a question of me wanting to be mean-spirited towards an individual. But for goodness sakes, if it's that important an issue, then reach in your own pocketbook and not the taxpayer's pocket to pay for these things. If you think it's that important to send someone for a singing lesson at Carnegie Hall or a trip to Norway for humanitarian reasons, it shouldn't be the taxpayers of the City of Ottawa that pay for that. All we're doing is putting some parameters on the spending. We're not eliminating it, but we're putting parameters on so that it is not a bottomless pit. And you have some capacity to tell groups we only have a limited amount of money, and now you as councillors are going to have to use your discretion to determine what is the greater priority and ensure that money is spread out over the course of the year. So I'd ask for your support on this. I know that there's some support obviously around the table for Councillor Eglai's motion. I respect the fact that he's put that forward, and I also will support the Councillor's motion with respect to the technical amendment that deals with the issue of new events. So we have two motions. The first one I believe that I received was the technical amendment, Councillor Eglai, and should I read that again, or do people recall that one? It was the reference with the word new. I think we can put it up on the screen. So moved by Councillor Eglai, and it goes on to say, or stage any new events supported by no donations. On that, carried? Sorry. Well, I'll read it. In an election year, a member of council must not seek donations and sponsorships for any event that has not been staged in the previous 2 years, nor accept donations or stage any new, the word new is new, events supported by donations and sponsorships after he or she has filed nomination papers for election to any office in the City of Ottawa. Now, is there a reason why it's not on the screen? All right. We're just going to find out why it's not on the screen. Where? Do people see it on their screens? Okay. Okay, so on this motion, carried. The next, this would be an amendment, I believe, Councillor, to the policy that would bring the cap from 3.5 to 5%. And I'll call yeas and nays on that. So this is to bring it to 5% from 3.5%. Don, can you call the vote? Do you have to do it?
Councillor Shirelli? Councillor Clark?
No.
Councillor Deans? Councillor Egli?
Yes.
Yes? Yes, sir. Councillor Hobbs?
No.
Councillor Hubley?
Yes.
Councillor Hume? Councillor McRae?
No.
Councillor Moffat?
No.
Councillor Manette? Conseiller Manette?
No.
Councillor Monette? No.
Taylor?
Yes.
Councillor Thompson?
Yes.
Mayor Watson?
No.
5 yeas, 6 nays, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, so that's defeated. So on the main report as amended. Sorry? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. Well, I'm sorry. Do you have are you bringing this motion forward now, Council? Okay. Okay, so, all right. So on item number 1 is the Code of Conduct for Members of Council and Gifts Registry. Yeah.
And I think Councillor McRae's motion is also on this item.
Can I? But is your motion to be debated today? Okay.
Okay. We've confused the two.
All right. So, yeah. So which one are you bringing that forward to? Item number 1, the gifts registry. Okay. All right. So would you want to introduce it now, please?
Sure, Mr. Mayor. I introduced it earlier, and I apologize if I said the wrong words on this. And it's simply, Mr. Mayor, an amendment, excuse me, that there be full disclosure on all gifts, benefits, and hospitality received that exceed $30 from one source in a calendar year. So it's from 200 to 30. And again, I apologize for a bit of confusion.
Okay. So that motion, do people have that on the screen now?
It was also circulated a couple hours ago, too, Mr. Mayor.
Maybe we can get a clarification. Is this motion for item number 1 or item number 2?
1.
Item number 1. All right. So we're going to deal with number 2 because those were Councillor Egli's motions dealing with item number 2. So we'll hold yours because we're going to go back to number 1. So item number 2, as amended by Councillor Egli's motion, with the one that passed with new, carried. Carried on number 2. As amended. Councillor Shirelli, do you want yeas and nays?
I just wanted to point out that some of us will be bringing motions at council. Okay?
Yep. No, that's fine.
Because they come out of this.
Yeah, and I think, as Councillor Wilkinson or Harder mentioned, if you could get them to them before so they have some time to analyze them.
Yeah,
so, yeas and nays on item number 2, as amended.
Councillor Deans, Councillor Eglai,
Yes.
Councillor Hubley,
Yes.
Councillor Hobbs,
Yes.
Councillor Hume, Councillor McRae,
Yes.
Councillor Moffat,
Yes.
Councillor Monette,
Yeah.
Councillor Monette?
Councillor Taylor,
Yes.
Councillor Thompson,
Yes.
Councillor Clark, Mayor Watson.
Mike? Yes.
11 yeas, 0 nays.
Okay, 11, nothing. If Councillor Clark could use his microphone. Now, item number 1, we have an amendment moved by Councillor McRae. Councillor, if you'd like to introduce it, please.
Certainly, Mr. Mayor. When I spoke to this earlier, we've heard from delegations with regards to this issue, and I think that by bringing this to 30, it aligns us with the tickets. And I'm not sure it requires much more introduction, other than it's a reduction from 200 to 30, and it's consistent with the ticket policy. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Okay. Comments, questions on this item? Yeah. Okay. There it is. Do you see it on your screens? So, be it resolved that the full disclosure of all gifts, benefits, and hospitality received that exceed $30 from one source in a calendar year. Councillor Clark, did you requested yeas and nays? Okay. So, yeas, unless anyone would like to speak to it? No? Okay. Question, Councillor Eglai.
Yeah, sorry, mic's on. Can we get a bit more clarification of what gifts are fairly clear, but what benefits and hospitality, what the clerk's understanding of that is?
Benefit could be a taxi ride, that kind of thing that doesn't quite fall into a gift, but not hospitality. As an
Hospitality
example.
would be any food or drink?
Food or drink.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so yeas and Councillor Shirelli.
Question. So does that mean if we're invited to function at, say, an embassy, that clearly whatever they give you at that is going to be over $30, so we would have to find a way to declare that?
That's more likely within your larger municipal responsibilities and will be exempted.
Okay.
Anything else, Councillor?
Okay, well, I'm going to vote against it now because I haven't had time to consider it, but I want to explore what the definition is between now and council.
Okay. All right.
Because I thought Councillor McRae was going to, she indicated earlier that she'd be moving this at council as opposed to here. So I actually did not do any research on it.
Okay. Councillor Monette, Conseiller Monette, s'il vous plaît.
Councillor Monette, please.
Against what was proposed. Can you explain why you had proposed opposite to what we're having presented right now?
In looking at the threshold for disclosure for gifts generally in the various jurisdictions is a wide range. As I said earlier, I think it ranges from total prohibition to $500 to $600. In consultation with councillors, knowing what I know now, that you don't get a whole lot of gifts, I felt that the $200 would probably capture the exceptional important gift that you would receive from an international delegation or some kind of festival situation. And likely in most of those instances would be probably even stay with the city as part of its archives. So it was a judgment call, if I can put it that way. I did put it in the report that the federal commissioner has had that discussion with the members of the House of Commons, and she's recommending $30. That's not yet adopted. It may be, it may not be. But starting from my initial premise, where I think no gifts is the best policy for public elected official to take, that's where I came down on 200.
Thank you for the clarification.
Any other questions or comments on Councillor McRae's motion? So on, yeas and nays have been called on the motion.
Councillor Shirelli? Councillor Deans? Councillor Eglai?
Yes.
Councillor Hubley?
No.
Councillor Hobbs?
Yes.
Councillor Hume? Councillor McRae?
Yes.
Councillor Moffat?
Yes.
Conseiller Monette?
Councillor Monette? No. No.
Yes.
Councillor Thompson?
No.
Councillor Clark?
No.
Mayor Watson?
Yes.
6 yeas, 5 nays.
Okay. Any other motions on item number 1? Est-ce qu'il y a des autres motions sur...
Any other motion on point number 1?
Yeas and nays on item number 1 as amended, please.
Councillor Shirelli?
Yes.
Councillor Deans? Councillor Eglai?
Yes.
Councillor Hubley?
This is voting on item 1 as amended.
Yes.
Councillor Hobbs?
Yes.
Councillor Hume? Councillor McRae?
Yes.
Councillor Moffat?
Yes.
Conseiller Monette?
Councillor Monette?
Councillor Taylor?
Yes.
Councillor Thompson?
Yes.
Councillor Clark?
Council.
Mayor
Councillor, if
Watson?
you could use your mic, please, so the people at home could hear.
Of course.
Thank you. And yes.
11 yeas.
Okay, thank you. Notice is a motion for consideration at a subsequent meeting. Inquiries, demande de renseignement,
Inquiries?
other business, and adjournment. Thank you. Meeting adjourned.